I would have an easier time understanding it, or anything. I mean, it's really just a bad psychological thriller, bad psychological thriller, bad psychological thriller.
Do you know how hard it would be to punch through a snare head like that?
I would probably rate it, 1.
I've never seen a conductor do this, and all the sound just stops.
I love Whiplash. I know, it's not the most surprising thing to say. Everyone who watches it says they love it. But it is one of those movies where you hear everyone say it's amazing, go and watch it, and then you come out saying, yeah, that was actually pretty amazing. It was like that 10 years ago, and it's still like that now. And I decided for the 10th anniversary of Whiplash, I just wanted to talk about how much I love this movie. For a quick summary of the movie. This film is about a jazz drummer, Andrew Neiman, who gets accepted into the Schaefer Conservatory, which is basically this movie's version of Berkeley, which, if you don't know Berkeley, it's music Harvard. And while Andrew's at this school, there's this teacher that is this big scary guy of the Schaefer Conservatory, but he's also the best guy around. Not as a teacher necessarily, but he is basically the sign that you're one of the best jazz students in the school and therefore in the country if you're playing or learning from him. And besides, his hyperfixation will be on one student in particular, none other than Andrew Neiman, who he progressively becomes more and more manipulative towards throughout the movie in order to spawn his greatest creation: greatness. What I love most about this movie is that both Terrence Fletcher and Andrew Neiman have a common goal. Unlike the other students who are motivated purely by concentrated fear, Fletcher and Neiman have the same achievements in mind: achieving said greatness. Whether the prestige or mythicality that once embodied jazz is gone or not is a consistent question throughout the movie, with both characters telling stories about jazz greats like Charlie Parker or Buddy Rich, focusing on these titans of jazz shrouded in flashiness or mystery. Both are unsure how to achieve this status of titan, with Fletcher constantly lashing out with abuse towards his students, becoming more and more desperate by the year to not just find someone that's great, but to see someone who is just as desperate as he is so he can live vicariously through their youth and potential. Enter Neiman, the aspiring drummer who progressively moves his way up in the prestigious jazz school. More than any other student, however, Neiman faces this rigorous abuse, gaslighting, sheer puppet stringing from Fletcher. And how does Neiman reciprocate this? By isolating himself. His family, social life, girlfriend, you name it, all of it is sacrificed in order to achieve this idea of being the best. The movie makes it very apparent that this is absolutely a path to destruction, as foreshadowed by another prodigy of Fletcher's before Neiman ever stepped foot in the Schaefer Conservatory or in the path of jazz musicians glorified like Charlie Parker. But the greatest strength of this film is how it holds back its answers. There are only whys that keep adding and adding up over time, and all of them are answered in the film, but you have to look through detail after detail in this movie, because everything you need to know about the message in this movie is there. The questions about Fletcher's teaching, the psychological destruction of Neiman, the artistic challenge of balancing a competitive nature and creative integrity. All of these things are answered in the movie, but it's not given to you. Because if you think anything in this movie is given to you, then you probably think it's a motivational movie. Because the ending of this movie is one of the most iconic and well-known in this century, but it also captures exactly what I'm talking about. It's a very open-ended ending. It has multiple perspectives where the main relationship between Neiman and Fletcher finally connect and they are on the same page. Fletcher has created his ultimate musician while Neiman has become the drummer he always aspired to be. Meanwhile, everyone else is in absolute horror of what they are watching. Look at the dad's face. Is that the face of seeing your son achieve his dreams? God, I hope not. In fact, I'll tell you, no, he can't even recognize his son anymore. Fletcher has the birth certificate in his hands now, and the date was written to today. As simple as I possibly can put it, this movie is about obsession. And having that pursuit of obsession completely engulf your life. And when you spent your entire life achieving your life goal, well, there's not much goal left for your life. It's probably at the expense of nothing else in your life mattering. However, as analyzed and as thoroughly researched as the ending of Whiplash is, it's also one of the most misinterpreted endings in modern movie history. It's about the guy who finally accomplished his dreams. That's pretty motivational. Look at the smile on his face. Look at the smile on the teacher's face. But if you look at everything that happened before this moment, also known as the entire movie, well, let's just say this movie is defined as a psychological thriller for a reason.
Why the fuck didn't you say so?
Most of this movie is a mental battle, and it doesn't shy away from that. It might not be perfectly accurate to how jazz schools teach their students, but the abuse itself is a very real thing that happens. And it feels real in a way where you're scared of this guy, and you're scared of what he is going to do to these poor students. Because everything he does is a calculated move disguised as being for the greater good. His dissatisfaction with a student isn't because he doesn't like the music they're playing, it's to see how they will bend to him. Most of the details he fixates on aren't recognizable to the audience, so making those moments when he stops the band makes it all the more unpredictable and tense. What I'm saying is that people who think Fletcher is a motivational figure clearly have some issues in their life, because although his ethic does have some truth in there, it's executed in a way where his students almost die and he gets expelled from the school, so it doesn't really fucking work, does it? Because yes, although you don't stand out by doing what everyone else does, the means of how Fletcher gets people to stand out are kind of unethical. Okay, so yeah, I'm doing my Whiplash analysis and I'm telling you there's people who don't get this movie and they're misunderstanding it. I know, it's a little pretentious of me to tell you there are people who don't get this movie, but it's not nearly as pretentious as people who don't get this movie. Oh my god. Now, I don't exactly want to call this two sides of the same coin, but I saw this post on Twitter months ago and I'm very, very petty about it, and I'm going to be very petty about it, but I have this tweet pulled up calling Whiplash a motivational movie, which is a grave misunderstanding of what this movie was trying to get at, but the response misunderstands the movie just as much. I can't take Whiplash seriously because the premise is flawed. You don't get good as a jazz drummer by becoming a human metronome. The whole thing has a cartoon model of musical excellence. Maybe it should have been about sports instead. Sports instead. Sports instead. Now, based off what I explained in Whiplash so far, you might be thinking, hey, isn't the whole messaging of the movie is that you don't become a great jazz drummer by being a human metronome? Isn't that a thing the movie portrays pretty directly throughout? The answer is yeah. Again, I understand where this guy is coming from. He's reacting to a misinterpretation of the movie, but he in himself is misinterpreting the movie, and that's where I come in. Because any truth he has brought up in this tweet is immediately overwhelmed by his bias. Because again, I want to emphasize this movie is about obsession and how obsession can take over your life under the wrong influences. But this guy's interpretation of the movie is literally, you don't get good at drumming by being abused. Because he immediately follows up this tweet by saying, oh, if you want to get good at jazz, listen to Miles Davis instead of watching a movie. And look how this tweet owns a fictional character by showing an actual jazz musician playing jazz. Maybe the abusive teaching style doesn't work after all. And then there's a clip of Victor fucking Wooten, because of course there is. I feel like I'm forced to hear a boomer talk about how great Larry Bird was in the 80s because someone brought up Space Jam around them. But unlike Space Jam and Space Jam 2 for that matter, Whiplash has unanimous praise. Let me repeat that, unanimous praise. If you go to a critic talking about this movie, they'll give you a thumbs up. Go to the average Joe about this movie, they'll give you a thumbs up. Go to literally practically everyone about this movie, they will give you 2 big thumbs up. I can only do one at a time, unfortunately. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but virtually everyone loves this movie except for one group of people. And they just so happen to be people who dabble in the same type of world as Whiplash, jazz musicians. Listen, you could take the harshest critic in the world, put them in front of this movie, and they will not nearly have a tenth of the skepticism that the average jazz musician has towards Whiplash. So a part of me wants to get to the bottom of this. Why do jazz musicians not like Whiplash that much? What do they see in this movie where they watch it and they spit it out? But there's a part of me that wants to ask, why does someone like Donald Fagen hate this movie so much?
He made that movie of the horrible drum teacher.
Yes, I totally agree.
Fuck that motherfucker.
I love Steely Dan. Donald Fagen's a miserable person. But me just getting mad at every single jazz musician who shits on this movie, it's not going to give me any answers. I have to look high and low, to and fro, just to see if I can find an answer to the question, why do jazz musicians hate Whiplash? On YouTube, it's common for videos of professionals reacting to movies in their profession. For example, a Navy SEAL reacts to Navy scenes in movies. What is Battleship? How accurate is that to the Navy? I hope it's a 10. Or you'll have a chef that looks at every cooking movie and he'll give all of them like 6s and 8s, and then he'll look at Ratatouille and give it a 10 just because it says cooking is a feeling inside. So that one gets a 10. Listen, I'm just glad chefs love Ratatouille, but why do jazz musicians hate Whiplash? I don't get it.
Now, I remember when this one came out, it was very polarizing, and a lot of people in the music community, especially the jazz community, didn't really like it.
But I think the idea, or at least what I want out of these videos, is when you have a professional reacting to these movies, you don't just want them to look at a movie and say, oh, it's exactly like what I do, or it's not exactly what I do. But the idea, or at least what I want to take away from videos like these, I want the industry knowledge of these professionals, and I want to see how it applies towards the movie.
This is the worst dinosaur probably in the entire Jurassic Park franchise. The real artistic license is in the idea that they're depicting Dilophosaurus as venomous.
Like, say, if there's a certain detail in this movie that I missed and the professional can tell me, oh, this actually helps tell the story even better than I thought it did. I love stuff like that. I love anything that can let me appreciate a movie more. I want to bring up my first example, Thomas Prigden. He did a video for GQ, and he also went to Berkeley. What do you know? In his video for GQ, he dissects one of the scenes in Whiplash, specifically the moment when shit hits the fan for Neiman when he gets humiliated by Fletcher for the first time, or as it's more commonly referred to as the Not My Tempo scene. He actually defines things that genuinely give insight into these sessions, and it shows you these microaggressions that Fletcher does that actively gaslight Neiman that you wouldn't catch on if you're a non-musician. I didn't catch on to them. Like how Fletcher will give him too short of a count to start the song. Even though the time signature is 7/8, he starts from 5 instead of 1. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, he starts from 5, 6, 7.
The conductor is like low-key hazing this guy, and I've been hazed by music directors. A lot of times people tell you that it's for your own good. Yeah, he's only on you because he knows you're good and you can do better or whatever. But I don't think he was explaining anything, so the drummer is just so nervous.
A good example of this gaslighting is when Fletcher is playing a song in a 7/8 time signature, but when he asks Neiman to start counting the tempo, it's suddenly in 4/4.
Start counting.
5, 6, 7.
In 4, damn it! Look at me!
Now I'm confused. I don't understand if is the problem that he is speeding up the beat or that he is not playing in 4.
So Neiman is constantly being chastised for every little thing he does. Fletcher starts asking Neiman to start counting a BPM of 215, which, to give you an idea, if your heart pumps that fast, is called a heart attack. Because even if you're the most experienced musician in the world, you're not going to be a human metronome. It's pretty much impossible. But Fletcher wants perfection, so that must be the point of the movie, is that you should be a human metronome. Man, I gotta go on Twitter.
I feel like they're kind of blending in two different aspects of music. And at this point, as a drummer, you're just completely confused because this guy he's just hazing you at this moment.
He wants Neiman to do things that musicians normally don't do, but he also wants to chastise Neiman in order to submit this poor student under his iron fist. Yes, is it extremely small and you don't have to know about these things in order to enjoy the movie? But details like that are why I love movies, and this video helps me love the movie even more. It breaks down Neiman breaking down. But as a drummer, he's able to take that experience and add context to the movie on an emotional level, which I love even more. He's experienced musicians trying to get into his emotions, so he'll play a certain way, and he gets the message of that scene down pretty well. Now, I wouldn't exactly call Thomas Prigden a jazz drummer per se. I mean, he went to Berkeley, and it's prestigious at this and that, and he plays on Mars Volta Records, where the time signatures change every 2 seconds. But he is a drummer that provides insight into the movie, which I prefer even more. But not every drummer is like Thomas, and that's why these videos get made, which leads to the other half of how these videos usually go, where usually they'll look at something and they'll say, this is accurate, this isn't accurate. And it's not to say that can't be a thing in the video. Like for example, if a police officer reacts to a buddy cop movie in the 80s and they start seeing Billy Crystal shooting someone unprompted, they might actually say it's pretty accurate. But a lot of these videos can become victim to the yay or nay nature of accuracy. Because although the video earns credibility through the actual profession of the professional, that doesn't necessarily translate over to insight. Now again, I like what these videos can achieve, but these professionals sometimes can get caught up on a certain detail and they can't let it go.
They're almost non-human, twisted and as kind of vile, and to me it's really quite racist.
And their consensus is that the movie's inaccurate. Is it a good movie? Is it a bad movie? I don't know, but the takeaway is that the certain thing they did in a certain scene is not exactly how a professional would do it.
With the Gatling gun, and of course he's 500 yards away. So how accurate is that from 500 yards away? I mean, come on.
Like, I know the point of this video is that you're rating movies based on their accuracy, but This doesn't do anything for anyone. But ultimately, the purpose of these videos are to provide insight into a professional's profession or insight into the movie. Sometimes they do both, sometimes they do neither. There are other videos out there where they get other drummers and they have their own perspective of this movie. And by that I mean they have perspective of one scene the producer chooses for them and they watch it and they look at it. Like I said, I much rather prefer a breakdown of these types of scenes rather than getting a professional to rate these scenes on accuracy. For example, Antonio Sanchez, if you know who he is, then you know like he's good at drumming. So he went on Insider to watch movies and rate them on accuracy on a scale of 1 to 10. And Whiplash got an astounding 1 of 10.
Probably rated at a, 1. It kind of shows that speed for the sake of speed. There's no finesse, there's no nuance.
And the second lowest one got a 7 out of 10, and virtually all of the other ones got like 9 or 10s out of 10s. So what's the deal with that? Why is Whiplash like this horrible example of accurate drumming in movies? You're telling me this guy singled out this movie and humiliated it because it wasn't perfect and how it was trying to do something? Ooh. Because with all of the other clips he's shown, it's basically showing them a drummer drumming and he goes, yeah, that's pretty accurate, and he gives it a 10. But with Whiplash, the movie is so dense that just showing the drummers drumming is a disservice. For example, in this video, he talks about how their drumming is so fucking stiff.
When you want to play fast, the first thing you have to do is relax instead of tensing up.
You have to watch everything that led up to this moment, but he can't really ask why they're so stiff. As a drummer, you want to be a little bit more relaxed. You want all the motion to go into the wrist, and then you can drum. They're using their forearm and bashing like cavemen. It's so physical. Yeah, when you watch this scene without any context, it's not how you play drums professionally, sure.
The faces he's making while he's playing, it was like if he was lifting weights and trying to see how much he can go before breaking.
So in my script, I said that if you only watch this movie for the accuracy, then you're only watching half of the movie. I want to change that. If you're only watching this movie for the accuracy, then you're not watching it at all. Everything usually has a rhyme or reason that's in the vein of psychology rather than actual practicality. For example, why are they so tense when they're drumming? Why are they so tense around this abuser? Scratches my chimp brain. They're tense, Fletcher's tense, and the audience is tense. And if you want the audience to feel tense, you kind of want your actors to not just look really relaxed. I'm just saying. But yeah, if you were plopped into a room and you're asked like, okay, rate that on accuracy now, and you watched it and you say, it wasn't that accurate. Like, I understand how he got to the conclusion that he got, but it also annoys the shit out of me. Now, Antonio did leave a comment on the video he was featured on for people like me who kind of got upset that he gave Whiplash a 1 of 10 because he said it wasn't accurate, which sure, it makes me sound like a fucking baby when I say it out loud. But don't worry, Antonio assures me he actually has watched the movie. He didn't just watch this scene and go on with his day. He sat down and watched the movie. And to be honest, I could have just saved myself a lot of work if I just read the comment before writing this entire thing. I found this a little too late, I'll be honest. Again, here's Antonio's comment. He says, yes, there was decent realistic playing throughout the film. Myers Teller, for the most part, pretty good drummer. But for this specific video, he got asked to rate this specific scene. And he says, even if Fletcher was trying to mess with his head and asking him to play fast and make him uncomfortable, the actual playing is absolute nonsense. 0. Doesn't pass his actual playing, and bleeding hands are absurd. It is possible to play incredibly fast where the playing is organized, coordinated, and polished. Not on this scene, hence the 1 rating. Cheers. Could have done without the cheers. But I say this multiple times throughout the video, and I'm gonna say it here first. This comment can basically be summarized as, if you take away things from the movie that make it a movie, then it's not as good. I don't care how good of a drummer you are, that is bad criticism. Deliberately ignoring elements of something you're criticizing is bad criticism. Is the playing accurate to how you would normally play drums? No, but is it accurate if you had an abusive teacher that made you tense? But this is less Antonio's fault and more the fault of this actual format. I think rating these scenes purely for accuracy is flawed because you don't take away anything from it, because it doesn't even rate Whiplash correctly. I mean, I feel like the movie is pretty accurate to drumming because, again, they're actually playing the drums. So what I'm saying, I guess they just set the guy up to fail. But it's a company doing this, not a jazz musician going out of the way to say, oh, it's inaccurate. Unless, let's say you're not part of a company and you still make a video like this where you just rank a scene based on its accuracy. That actually pisses me off more, because when someone like Charles Cornell does it, I don't really know what excuse to give him. Now, the scene Charles reacts to isn't the same as Antonio's. In fact, it's the same as Thomas's, the Not My Tempo scene. Except, instead of an analysis of the scene, he's just rating it on accuracy.
Little trouble there. Let's pick it up at 17.
That was a really weird place to do that. There was no reason to stop that. Didn't sound like a problem at all.
And again, the same thing applies with Antonio. When you're rating something on the accuracy, you're missing a lot of the why of what's happening.
Not quite my tempo.
For example, why does Fletcher stop the song abruptly? Well, if you watch Thomas's video, you know it's a form of hazing. It's preparing the humiliation ritual that's about to happen. But in this video, he just says...
Little trouble there. Let's pick it up at 17.
That was a really weird place to do that. There was no reason to stop that. Didn't sound like a problem at all.
So cool, the takeaway is that that doesn't happen. Cool. That's awesome. So instead of getting a breakdown of the scene, we just get this objective viewing of yeses and nos. For another example, the count. So when Fletcher says 5, 6, and, there's like this specific quarter-second moment between the and when the actual song starts.
5, 6, and.
Unless you've like trained years and years and years in jazz, like Charles did, you wouldn't notice this detail where between the and the moment the song starts, there's like this tiny, like, I literally mean like an actual split second.
5, 6, and.
It's not where the one would have actually been.
Which I don't mind him talking about that. If he has the experience to notice something like that, you know what, all the better. But do I think he does it in good spirits?
I think people who liked this film were definitely of the mindset that, like, you know what, though, it's a great movie.
It doesn't click with me. It could be insight. As far as I'm concerned, it could be insight, but it just doesn't feel that way. I think there could be something there. I think there could be a conversation there where I'm analyzing this more than Charles ever did. I don't know. So again, how Thomas mentioned, starting the song at 5 instead of 1, how you normally would, it's off-putting. It's disorienting. It's fitting for the scene. But then in this video, he just mentions doing that is weird, and it normally wouldn't happen.
It's kind of just jarring and weird to go 5, 6, and you probably wouldn't see that.
And if that's all you have to say about a scene like this, then I personally don't like that.
There was no reason to stop that. That wouldn't have happened.
None of this would happen.
What was that?
But the thing that annoys me more than the actual analysis in this video is how he does this certain thing that just, it gets under my skin. Firstly, he refers to people who like this movie as being in their own category, which the category is literally everyone.
I think people who liked this film.
Which, if you like this movie, doesn't that kind of undermine you? How else do I say it? It's such an acclaimed movie. So even though the intent of judging these scenes on accuracy is meant to be unbiased, there's just certain things in there that feel biased, which...
Maybe people have experiences in bands that are whacked like this, but not in my experience.
No one's actually asking him to do this format unless you want to say, oh, the YouTube algorithm's making me do this. Oh, YouTube algorithm doesn't make you do anything. Really, I get it. It's a popular thing to get the professional to go into a movie theater and watch the scenes where he's looking at his profession. The credibility of these people are why people watch. You want someone with years and years of experience to see this thing, and the illiterate people really like it when you nitpick, but they're not going to remember you.
So in terms of accuracy, I would probably give it like a 3 out of 10.
And again, for a movie as riddled in context as Whiplash is, trying to rate these scenes based purely on accuracy, yeah, of course they're not going to be accurate, because the whole point is that they're not trying to play jazz perfectly in this scene. There's a bunch of mental battles going on, and these videos do absolutely nothing to portray that. Really, this is more of a critique of this type of format of content rather than really lashing out at these jazz musicians, although I think I think he has bias, because he does react to another scene in this movie. And by that, I mean the scene after Fletcher gets fired at the Schaefer Conservatory and Neiman quits drumming. There's this scene where Neiman goes to a jazz club and none other than Fletcher is playing piano. They meet up and they have this conversation that acts as one of the rare moments of vulnerability between these two characters in the movie. You could argue Fletcher is still doing mind games here, but he never shows this side of himself in the movie. And it's really the only time Charles interacts with the psychological aspect of this movie head on, you know, because it's a psychological thriller. And he understands from this scene as a jazz musician that where most people saw a motivational line in J.K. Simmons, Charles saw it for what it really was, which is that this guy is a fucking psycho.
I understand what he's saying. In terms of encountering this type of personality in the real world, not only would I be very shocked if I ever found somebody quite like this, I would make sure to always steer clear of them, and that person would probably almost never work because everyone would hate being around them.
So Chuck can look at the psychological part of this movie and take analysis from there. fair, which I like more. Seeing these jazz musicians try to apply that idea of competition to themselves and seeing how much they connect to it or not, I think that's a lot more interesting than just saying, the count was off. Okay, so far, none of these people have actually watched Whiplash, they're just reviewing scenes so far, and I'm kind of using these as icebreakers.
To be honest, I've never actually watched the whole movie. That wouldn't have happened!
Now, I say those are icebreakers, but I'm actually about to take a step back, because I have to talk about Rick Beato.
Okay, this is completely ridiculous.
Now, if you've ever watched my oh-so-iconic video, Why Does Rick Beato Hate Whiplash? I'm getting into territory where I'm talking about something that I've already talked about. And the same goes for someone else I'm about to talk to in this video, but we're not there yet. Now, the main reason I want to talk about these guys again, I just have more to say. I was so blinded by rage sometimes that I wasn't really able to see the full scope of what was really happening, so this is what this video is for. Now, I feel like I'm gonna be really mean, so I'm gonna start off with a warning. I don't hate Rick, I don't think he's a dumb person, but he can choose to be dumb sometimes.
Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato.
Because Rick is very, very educated in music. Master's degree in jazz guitar, he's taught at Berkeley. When he knows what he's talking about, he can make something that you can learn from. I haven't learned anything from him, but now with Whiplash, even though this is a movie about jazz, this is very much out of Rick's area of expertise. Because he can analyze music, he can analyze any song you want him to, but when it comes to movies, no, he didn't go to film school, he went to music school, he's a jazz academic. And if there's anything I learned from college, it's that only law professors like movies about their own profession. So Rick starts off the video by shouting out another YouTuber, Adam Neely, which, and just you wait.
So I was just watching my good friend Adam Neely's new video, Whiplash, as reviewed by a jazz musician.
He starts it off by saying he's never seen Whiplash, which, that's how Adam started his video, he's never seen Whiplash either. But here's the thing, Rick gives you an explanation as to why he's never seen Whiplash. Because he saw the trailer.
I said, well, I've seen the trailer. And they said, well, so what's wrong with the trailer?
I'm going to take this opportunity to be as petty as I possibly can, because this video was uploaded on November 25th, 2018. Which firstly tells you how long I've been holding this in and how long I've been holding this contempt inside of me. But secondly, Whiplash was released in theaters October 10th, 2014. So if we do the math between the time Whiplash came out and the time Rick uploaded his video, that's 4 years Rick has had to watch Whiplash. But he hasn't, because he watched the trailer, and he even pinned this comment. I would say to people who are critical about him just talking about the trailer without seeing the movie, the whole point of the trailer is to sell the movie. Time is valuable, and if I'm going to see a movie, I want to see something that I enjoy. If the trailer doesn't convince me that the movie will be worth my time, then I'll spend my time elsewhere. If the trailer didn't earn Rick's attention, then that's the fault of the people who hired the trailer editors. It isn't Rick's fault that the trailer didn't convince him that it was worth it to watch the whole film. But you know what? He's right. He's right if the date was October 9th, 2014. However, within 4 years, Whiplash has had other credentials to prove that it's a movie worth watching. So by the time Rick makes this video, Whiplash had won 3 Oscars, 3 BAFTA Awards, a Critics' Choice Award, a Golden Globe, the Audience Award, and the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival, the 39th highest ranked movie ever made on IMDb, the 41st highest ranked movie on Letterboxd, just to show you it's not a fluke. What if you took the average weight of 49 critics' scores and it came out as an 89 out of a 100? Or maybe you'd rather care more about what the audience thinks, where the unweighed average of the movie among 1,600 people is 8.8. You get the point. This movie has proven to be worth watching, so why am I getting on to Rick as much as I am about this?
I'm going to go back and watch the trailer again, and I'm going to do a review of the trailer and see if I feel the same way.
And I think we get a total of like 5 seconds of the trailer running before he criticizes it. So Neiman in the trailer says that he likes the music in this certain cafe, mentioning Bob Ellis on the drums.
Bob Ellis on the drums.
Okay, if I'm watching this for the first time, if he said, I like the music they play here, Art Blakey on the drums, or Sonny Greer, or Elvin Jones, or Philly Joe Jones, I say, okay, well, this is a movie about jazz.
Okay, let's touch base again. Rick has not watched Whiplash because he saw the trailer. 4 years have gone by. 3 Oscars later, Rick has not watched Whiplash because he saw the trailer 4 years ago. But you know what? I didn't know this. Rick used to be a big band conductor. He has actually had the insight of being in the same position as Terrence Fletcher. Not many people can say that. Maybe he can explain why Terrence does the things he does. And what separates someone like Fletcher from someone of his profession. He could even get into some darker tones. Maybe there's parts of Fletcher that Rick sees in himself himself. That's just the interesting thing to me, because Fletcher is a scary person, so what's the line between this scary person and someone actually in that profession? And you know what, with someone like Rick's position as a former big band conductor, he can bring insight into these scenes, which he does. For example, did you know someone like Fletcher isn't supposed to be muscular or wear black t-shirts?
He doesn't look like a band director. He's rocking a black t-shirt.
But also the reason this is the first thing they show in the trailer is that they want to establish the main character instead of like doing Easter egg references to jazz drummers. So most people wouldn't even pick up on the name. They would just hear blah 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 on the drums. So, oh, this movie might be about drums and the character is talking about drums. I'm noticing a connection here. Okay, so the trailer's not pitch perfect. They didn't choose the right drummer in that moment to emphasize this movie is about jazz drumming. Maybe he's a rock drummer or a metal drummer. Actually, you know what? 2 seconds later, he tells you he's in Schaefer Conservatory anyways.
Part of Schaefer's top jazz orchestra. It's the best music school in the country.
Best music school in the country, and he is in their top jazz orchestra. And then there's footage of him drumming to match up with that. So Rick decides to ignore that and instead focus on the next possible thing he can criticize.
The key is to just relax. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about what the other guys are thinking. You're here for a reason. Have fun.
Okay, let's just imagine that somebody would talk to a student like that. It's actually very weird.
Because when there's something negative in his mind, it cannot be fucking changed, can it? And again, the criticisms he gives have absolutely no context. He doesn't know that Fletcher is love-bombing Neiman right now to give him a false sense of security. But Rick can tell that something is off. He just can't piece together that things are weird for a reason.
This is really bizarre. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about what the other guys are thinking. Just have fun is nothing that any professor would ever say to a student that I've ever met.
He can't piece together that this is a deliberate choice by the director, the actor, cinematographer, editor, the guy who made the trailer, the people who put on the suits, the people who did the makeup. It's all deliberate. The next thing he comments on is Fletcher name-dropping
Buddy Rich here.
which if you don't know, he was a very prominent drummer around the 50s to the 70s. He was on TV a lot. I won't get too deep into it here, but jazz musicians get very caught up on that detail, referencing Buddy Rich.
His character is based on someone who's like Buddy Rich, which is not necessarily a great thing.
I don't know.
Okay, the rushing and dragging part, yeah, you might ask a student if they're doing that, although I would tell them that they're rushing and dragging.
You're rushing. Here we go.
But you're not going to strike a student.
And then everything from this point on can be summarized in one sentence. Rick, you stupid motherfucker, all you have to do is take 2 hours out of your day to watch this movie and none of this would have happened. But you know what? It probably would be in vain because you're so insecure and far up your ass about this movie that you can only manage to watch the trailer and only listen to the Spotify top 10.
And it turns into a song that I don't want to listen to.
I'm just saying, you need to hire someone specifically to get you to listen to new music, because whatever you're doing, it's not working.
Now, no big band conductor or music professor that I know has 3 hours a day to spend in the gym.
Just watch the movie.
I push people beyond what's expected.
Okay, any drummer that is sweating that much and playing with that kind of a face is definitely not in the pocket.
What's that, Rick? You wouldn't have thrown a chair at one of your students? That's great. And because that's inaccurate to him, that means the movie is bad. Also, you're not going to strike a student. Big no-no in the teaching world. You're going to get sued and fired. Guess what happens to Fletcher? Spoiler alert. Listen, I don't like the Academy that much, but I recognize its purpose is to recognize excellence within cinema and the film industry. That I understand. I don't think they always bat 100, but that's kind of the point. Just watch the movie. Just watch the movie. So if you get a body language expert, you can tell I get a lot more agitated towards Rick Beato compared to someone like Thomas. He has the patience to actually watch the scene, but more importantly, dissect the relationship between being a musician and the psychology of being a musician. The hazing that he elaborates on in his video is immediately dismissed by Rick. In fact, he just starts talking about Spinal Tap because his brain looks like a wind-up chimp playing Neil Peart. He can't elaborate on anything, not because he's only watching the trailer, but I think if he actually watched scenes from this movie, he would just do the same thing.
I would never let him put my son through hell. Why would you let him get away with what he did?
Come on! No parent's gonna let their kid get treated like this.
I think he would be incapable of removing himself from the movie because he's a big band conductor or whatever the fuck, and he would constantly just say, no, you can't do that. Abusing people is wrong. You're not supposed to do that. That's a thumbs down. bad movie. I don't like the fact that an educational channel with millions of subscribers is able to do something like this. I don't like that at all. The clip where Neiman punches his drum, he doesn't even criticize it. He just says,
do you know how hard it would be to punch through a snare head like that? I have snares from the 60s that have the original heads on them.
Wow, snare drums are really hard to punch through. That means this is inaccurate? Well, apparently they require you to punch down on it really fucking hard. Who would have guessed? Rick, you're not criticizing anything, you're just saying what you watched.
Yeah, I think he likes me more now.
So now we have the part where the kid lies to his dad and tells him that he thinks it's going well.
I push.
And he just keeps doing this. He just keeps explaining what he's watching, and he just tries to make it sound the best like criticism as much as he can. And then he reacts to the good job clip, and he says the exact same thing as Charles.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
I can think of a lot more harmful words in the English language than good job.
Definitely don't agree that good job are the two most dangerous words in the English language. I mean, I can think of quite a few that are probably a little more dangerous.
When people ask me, have you seen it? I said, of course not. I don't watch those kind of movies.
What does he mean by that? I have no fucking clue.
I was on him, but it was never anything like that. That's ridiculous.
Like, he would yell at his students, but he would never, ever be someone like Fletcher, which, fucking good. I don't want you to be an abuser. But you know what? That's kind of what I wanted out of the video, was the line between him being a big band conductor and how he felt about Fletcher. And then he wraps up this video in a nice little bow tie where he says he doesn't watch movies.
If you want to know what kind of movies are universally liked by musicians, they're not actually movies.
What does he watch instead, then, you say? He reacts to people playing really, really bad on an instrument, and then he watches it like fucking Pauly from The Sopranos.
Every musician I know loves these videos. Check out this Yngwie one.
Man, I don't watch those kind of movies. Dude, Whiplash, I don't watch those kind of movies. Alright guys, let's go to my crib and watch the fucking same Lil Wayne vid we've been watching for the last 17 years. Alright guys.
Musicians love comedy about music.
Isn't he just the most insightful person you've ever seen in your life?
Now, I know that there's people out there that disagree with me, and that's totally cool.
Yes, Rick, there are probably going to be people who disagree with you. You know why? Because you have an inability to change.
This is just from a big band conductor's perspective. That's all for now. Please subscribe.
You're telling me you had 4 years to watch this movie, and instead of doing that, you watched the trailer again and made an entire fucking video reacting to the trailer instead of just watching the movie? Yeah, I am going to disagree with you. In fact, I'm going to make an entire video why I disagree with you, and then I'm going to bring it up again because I disagree with you that much. You still only watch the trailer because it's the only solace your mind can have. Anything else that would challenge that would also challenge your ego, so what do? The same fucking thing over and over and over again. You go to the Spotify charts, listen to the top 10 songs, claim that music has gotten worse, and call it a fucking day. Because Rick, his popularity on YouTube came from explaining why things are good. Like again, he's very credible as a music guy because he has a big old jazz degree and he can literally just hear a song and know the chords immediately. I don't know a lot of people who can do that. Also, he's been in the industry. He has connections with connections. You don't just catch an interview with Rick Rubin. Rick's life is music. But whenever he tries to explain why something is bad, he can't. He just can't. He would rather tell you what the point is rather than telling you how he got to a point, because most of the time he can't really tell you why he got to a certain point. So what I'm saying is that whenever Rick complains about something, there's not really a lot of stuff to back up what he's saying. Like, even if you're giving an opinion piece, you still have to apply the real world into what you're saying. But the natural harmony of the world sometimes just doesn't resonate with Rick. Even in the title of this Whiplash video, it says movies musicians hate. He's literally just telling you he hates this movie without ever seeing it. Ow. It's part of a larger problem I have on YouTube where someone like Rick Beato will use their credentials as their sole point of persuasion. Yes, they have more experience in music than I do, but does that mean they can make a better point about music? Not necessarily. Like, for example, Rick has a huge tendency to fearmonger about things. Like, how about the current state of music right now? Isn't music just worse right now? Well, Rick will tell you music's getting worse because he has a video explaining why.
Music is too easy to make.
Firstly, he talks about corporate greed through AI music, which I think is the only good good point he makes. He brings up generative AI and how that could ruin the industry just about. That to me is a perfectly fine point. I think greed is obviously the root of all evil, but that's the only thing he brings up about the industry itself. Everything else is just about the actual process of the musicians making music that he's upset with. And in case you're wondering, yes, everyone who's making music now is doing it wrong. Like, for example, did you know music is just too easy to make now? As in, you can go back and fix mistakes that you make in a song you want to make? Or how you can make songs nowadays without having to spend thousands of dollars on a drum kit, and instead you can program your own drums into a digital audio workstation? But you know why that's bad? Because it's lazier. Because these things are just so much more accessible and they can't be gate-kept, so it's bad. Like, where does this chip on his shoulder even come from? He chastises the sampling of drum sounds simply because they have to come from somewhere.
Look at all these mics. Now, you can put up 3 mics and get a drum sound. You can put up 2 mics and get a drum sound. But to get a professional drum sound, you tend to mic up the different instruments. I got 2 mics on the bass drum. I got a mic on this tom, mic on that tom, mic on the ride, 2 mics on the overheads, 2 mics on the snare here. I actually have 3 mics on the snare and a mic on the hi-hat.
Like, yeah, I would rather go on r/drums and download a bunch of kits rather than go out of my way to spend thousands of dollars on a drum kit. And he also mentions how amplifiers have been replaced with a plugin that functions as an amplifier, which he mentions has no skill.
They're so easy to use. Doesn't take any skill at all.
Compared to what, Rick? Taking the cord of an amp and plugging it into a wall rather than using a plug-in? It's in the name.
So easy to use. Doesn't take any skill at all. But it doesn't take any creativity either.
And he also talks about how because music is easier to listen to, it actually makes it less valuable.
So this is the water faucet in my kitchen. But imagine this is streaming on Spotify.
Which I'm going to be completely honest, it just isn't true.
It's all available on these streaming platforms, which is why music is not as valued by young people.
Like, Pet Sounds is considered one of the best albums made 50 years ago, and it's still considered one of the best albums made today. It didn't go down in value just because it became easier to listen to. The only difference is that without streaming, I'd probably never listen to this album. So compared to never listening to this album in my life, I got to hear it on streaming and I got to experience it there. I remember when I was a boy and I used to listen to the radio. I don't listen to those songs on the radio anymore. I might have a fondness for them, but in terms of like getting more value out of those songs because they were harder to access, no. Basically, I'm just saying all of this because in order for him to be right about anything he says, he has to ignore literally everything else around him. What, you need a MIDI pad to play chords instead of playing the piano? No, Rick, it's called experimenting.
Huh, what is this? What is this?
It's a new technology compared to the piano. People are going to experiment with it. But if you're just making music, it's just another tool to make music with. It's not a crutch. And I know people reacted to this. Fuck, even Fantano reacted to this. And it's hard not to parrot what he says verbatim because anyone who doesn't hate themselves can see through this video. And honestly, the reception to this video isn't even that bad. Mainly just because his audience are just people his age, both physically and mentally. But you know what? Not only does he say what the people want to hear, he also responds to the haters like me. I'm a hater. He responded to people like me. So he follows up this video where he says that music is not only getting worse, but it's actually dying. Did you know that? Did you know music is actually dying? Did you know Rick is actually the last of his kind? He's one of the few people fighting for music kind because everyone else just hates music. Everyone else is a music liar and he's the only music truther. He's taking the music red pill and he's showing you what's inside of his fucking mind. You want to know what his red pill is? He went to Google Trends and typed in the word music.
Music was at 100%. And where is it now? It's down to 25%.
He looked up the search traffic for the word music. Not Spotify, not YouTube, not Apple Music, not even streaming, just the word music. Because the amount of people who typed in the word music has gone down. And that means music is dying, and that's his only source. That's literally his only source.
Well, what about art? Is that any different than music? That's down 60%. Video games are actually way down too, but they hit 100% of search volume in 2012. Minecraft came out on November 18th.
Video games are dying too, but social media has gone up, okay?
Why are they not learning instruments? And why is video game playing going down? Because it takes work, and they don't want to put in the work.
People like me, we're on our phones jacking off the fucking porn all the time. We're not playing music, we're playing with our peepees.
People are less interested in music because it's boring to them. That's what I think.
Like, there's no other variables in his research. He didn't even try looking up the word Spotify, which, oh, that's where all the traffic is. Like, at some point, you just choose to be an idiot. Oh, by the way, he constantly contradicts himself. For example, he mentions the exact same thing, how technology innovated in the 40s and 50s, so things like Bach suddenly became easier to listen to.
My mom loved Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly. It was written in 1904. Now, my mom was born in 1925. She didn't have a record player until the 50s or so when she married my dad. She probably saw it on TV in the 60s.
So why is music just now going down in value? How has the technology now devalued music compared to the fucking 50s? And that great music will always persist.
If it's new to you, it's new. Doesn't matter what generation it's from.
Music is not as valued by young people.
Rick, you're just anti-technology. Now that's ridiculous. I'm anti-technology. I've got a YouTube channel with over 4 million subscribers.
The creative dependency on technology limits the ability of people to innovate. Don't look at YouTube.
So again, I have history with Adam Neely and Rick Beato. I made videos about both of these people, but Adam Neely in particular I have beef with. Let me put this into perspective. It's about a year ago. I don't even have 1,000 subscribers and I upload my little video. I made a little video about Whiplash and I uploaded it. A week after that video was uploaded, it would have had around 1,000 views. And lo and behold, out of the 1,000 people that watched that video, one of them was none other than Adam Neely. And he left a comment. He left a comment saying, LOL triggered. Which more than anything just tells me that he completely disregarded anything I said in the video. And he probably just laughed it off as me being upset or triggered. So yeah, whatever I said did not get through to him at all. So I'm gonna calm down and list my points very, very carefully. These people, Adam Neely, Rick Beato, Charles Cornell, they are the face of music education on YouTube, or one of the faces at least. Their duty as educators on YouTube are to educate as many a musician does. But here's the thing, because of that, they have a very, very large pool. They have more of a pool than I do. So when these guys talk about Whiplash, and instead of using their platform to provide further musical context or dramatic depth into the movie, they use their platform to discredit the movie. But this is a case where they persuade their audience solely on their credentials rather than what they actually talk about. Rick has this issue, pull up the Google trend and just, oh my god, you're just such an idiot. To me, at least, it is necessary to see when something like this happens. So I want to preemptively state, because I'm assuming Adam's going to watch this if he watched the last fucking thing. Yes, Adam, I was triggered, and I still am triggered, because I think a video like yours does more harm than good towards educating people on YouTube. Because this is meant to be a film analysis by someone who has no experience in analyzing film. So he makes really, really amateur decisions that he chooses to publish anyways under the guise that what he is saying is educational when it's really not. He uses it as a cover to manipulate how he feels about this movie, which is not what you want to do as an educator. Look at Fletcher, you don't want to manipulate people. So this video was made in 2018. I'm 6 years too late to a video that was 4 years too late to a movie. So yeah, it's probably a video that only I care about nowadays, but I still have a reason to talk about any of this. So enough talking about the video. Let's actually watch this video and just really just as patiently as possible dissect this video. And I'm going to watch it with the intent that Adam's experience as a jazz professional will allow me to appreciate this movie more and maybe even appreciate jazz more.
So I know that this is coming like 4 years too late, but until recently, I was a jazz musician who had never seen the movie Whiplash.
So he decides to watch Whiplash in a jazz park on an iPad. You trained for this. He says that the movie is brilliantly acted, shot, and directed, which is his thesis so far.
After watching the movie, which is brilliantly acted and shot and directed, I can safely say that no. The small, somewhat insular, and idiosyncratic world of jazz and higher education does not look the way that it does in the film, although it certainly looks like it could be that way.
From this point on, Adam more so wants to compare his experience of jazz education to the way it's portrayed in the movie. So the video isn't as much of a review as Whiplash as much as it's just Adam comparing the movie Whiplash to the jazz education world. In the description, Neely describes the video as an exploration of how the movie portrays contemporary jazz in New York, which the goal of the movie isn't to accurately portray jazz culture in New York. Going into the video trying to compare that, like, yeah, you're gonna set yourself up to be disappointed. But I guess he's just trying to apply his experience as best as he can, a former Berkeley student trying to react to a Berkeley-like world. I mean, he starts off positively enough. It's not greatly accurate to jazz education, but the movie got things right. He even plays the lick, a little jazz inside joke that definitely isn't overused. I'm being a little biased there, I'm sorry. But he's clearly done more research outside of just watching the movie. He didn't just watch the trailer and go back to watching guitar shred videos. He mentions that the movie is semi-autobiographical, with Damien Chazelle writing from his experience with a strict band director. Like certain slang, the setting, the family not understanding Neiman's ambitions as a drummer.
Andrew's extended family doesn't really get Andrew's obsession for music, as well as his accomplishments. Definitely rings true for a lot of musicians.
But Adam slips something here. A little part of the mask drops and he reveals how he truly feels about the movie. I just mean that I hear resentment.
I actually felt that that scene was the most emotionally accurate portrayal of anything in the entire film.
For Adam to highlight specifically that this is the most accurate scene in the movie, I think it speaks a lot to how he will progressively detach himself emotionally from the rest of this movie. He mentions more details. J.K. Simmons has a few mannerisms that seem accurate to a jazz professor, likely from his own experience at a college to which he bachelored in music. I didn't even know about that. It's not even mentioned in the video. I just didn't know that.
Dude, I went to music school. I have a degree in music.
I thought he just wanted pictures of Spider-Man. But I'm assuming having that sort of experience in the past helps Simmons connect with Fletcher a little bit more than the average actor. But these are details that Adam does pick up. It helps you be more immersed in the world of Whiplash. But to me, there's still some things that aren't fully commended. Like, he mentioned the acting was amazing.
After watching the movie, which is brilliantly acted and shot and directed...
Listen, I've seen this video more than anybody else in the whole fucking world. I would know if there was praise towards an actor aside from the thing at the beginning. Like, instead of explaining why the acting is amazing, he wants to talk about things the movie more or less got right with the acting.
The general posture of J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller more or less looks right.
If you more or less got it right, that just sounds like it's passable rather than being good. In fact, he would rather just talk about things that aren't 100% accurate that he can nitpick. Because that's the first 11 minutes of this video, is just him nitpicking.
I could sit here all day and nitpick all of the times that Miles Teller is moving his hands a certain way and what we're seeing is not what we're hearing, but honestly, it's not that important, and they got it more or less right.
A detail so minute and unimportant that he just brushes off as being more or less right, which becomes extremely undermining that the praise he has for this movie is just that they got things more or less right. Like, that's just extremely backhanded, and what's even more backhanded is the things he criticized that are just kind of out of the control of the movie itself. So Whiplash had a budget of around $3 million, and Adam is aware that this is a very, very low budget for a movie.
I do know that this was a film with a limited budget.
That's like if you only had $5,000 to make a NASCAR race car. In terms of movie budgets, that is like nothing. So because of that, whenever there is like a shortcut this movie can take, Adam decides to chastise it. Adam mentions that in order to have a speaking role in a movie, you have to be part of the Screen Actors Guild, which is this union.
Because in order to have a speaking role in a Hollywood movie, you need to be a member of the Screen Actors Guild. And it's going to be the actors, not the musicians, who actually bother getting a union card.
So to remedy this, the movie gets actors to act, which includes acting like they're playing their instruments in a dark and shady backdrop.
If the people in the movie have lines,
What are you doing?
chances are they're not going to look like they're playing their instrument for real. Oh, that's unfortunate.
So we're losing the narrative here. This has absolutely nothing to do with contemporary jazz culture. It's certainly not a review. This is just nitpicking, plain and simple. It's just nitpicking. I thought you were going to talk about how this movie portrays jazz education, not the fucking extra in the background trying to mimic a bass. And it's not like you can't nitpick these things, but it takes priority of the actual video. Thoughts and feelings about this movie are never truly revealed beyond passive aggression.
The whole movie feels like Damien Chazelle is remembering the general gist of jazz culture, but only through the haze of the memory of his experiences in high school.
Like, yeah, Adam says the movie's well acted and directed, but he's never going to elaborate on this in the video. It feels like he just says this to diffuse what he's about to say in the future. Any criticism you have about his criticism is invalid because he actually did praise the movie and he's not just hating on it, because at the beginning he said this one little sentence. And again, the first 11 minutes of this video are just nitpicking, just small things that are either not 100% accurate or just work as shortcuts because we can't spend all our time fighting an actor who can also play Caravan on double bass.
He's wearing a bass backpack case. In New York City, nobody wears those. Everybody uses wheels because they're a lot easier to navigate the New York City subway as well as the tight quarters of buildings.
And in fact, our movie is so low budget that we actually had to get one of our actors to train the other actors. Like, yeah, they had to cut so many costs in this movie because they were just forced to. So when your inside is just nitpicking things that are just more so, like, not perfect.
I'm using the studio band playlist.
Any musician would call this the studio band set list. Playlists are for Spotify. Playlists are for Spotify.
Of all the things you could have talked about in the movie, why nitpicking? I mean, overall, the details that focus more on actual proof of musicianship actually are condoned. However, there are details that take him out of the immersion of the movie, the suspension of disbelief shattered. So, for some reason, Adam really has a problem with one drummer in the movie, specifically the guy with red hair.
This guy does not look like a jazz musician. He looks like a high school jock.
And for some reason, Adam tries to psychoanalyze this guy as like Damien Chazelle's jock nerd bully.
Remembering the general gist of jazz culture, but only through the haze of the memory of his experiences in high school. Jazz, for Damien Chazelle, seems to be almost an emotional reaction to his experiences from high school.
And it's like, no, this guy was chosen by a casting director. And like, yeah, did Chazelle probably have a final say on if he gets to be in the movie or not? Sure, but Damien Chazelle didn't look at this guy and immediately get PTSD. And Adam just says this guy doesn't look like a drummer, but he plays drums in the movie. He's literally a drum, like he literally plays drums. And I don't know if he meant like the actor had to learn drums for the movie or what did he mean? And again, it's a case where focusing so much on the accuracy of a scene will actively hinder your viewing of this movie. Like, I hate to be that guy, but movies are a visual medium, so you want a guy who looks different from the main character. And also, what is the fixation on these actors having muscles that jazz musicians hate? Why do people who have like some sort of athletic semblance or just muscles not allowed to have that? Why is that so inaccurate?
It started with the emotion, and then from there it just becomes about, well, how do you capture that? And so we shot it kind of like a thriller, and sort of, it was even plotted as a thriller, and it was very much sort of done in the style of certain 70s kind of paranoid kind of movies that I just personally love and adore. But all in the interest of kind of really mapping that sort of anxiety in a very subjective way onto the screen.
No big band conductor or music professor that I know has 3 hours a day to spend in the gym.
Like, Fletcher's supposed to be intimidating. Like, I would rather have the guy that looks like a thumb throw a chair at Neiman than Jack Black. I don't know, they'd probably say Jack Black doesn't look like a fucking jazz professor either. Nobody looks like a fucking jazz professor. I could even get if you just put this at the end of the video, like, oh, here are all my nitpicks of the movie, here's my little fucking pedantic part, but no, this is the beginning of his review. So Adam comments on the lingo again, but instead of things that feel right, he mentions things that feel off to him. We're not gonna learn anything about this fucking movie, are we? So Whiplash made the mistake of calling a setlist a playlist. Fuck.
Playlists are for Spotify.
Or an even worse mistake. A drummer in the movie says they don't know the charts of a song by heart.
Don't know the charts by heart. You know Whiplash by heart.
He wouldn't say that. He would say, I don't have the charts memorized.
This is not criticism. What the fuck is this? But this is the part where things go from being fixated on to just outright ignorance. During the scene where Fletcher abuses Neiman, someone like Thomas made us realize that you actually need an understanding of music, at least in a big band setting, in order to actually capture the things Fletcher does to gaslight Neiman, like moving the goalpost from correcting time signature to tempo and making him do things that would be defined as hazing. But Adam's takeaway from the same exact moment is that it doesn't make sense.
During Fletcher's first abusive tirade towards Andrew, he demands that Andrew count me at 215, as in count at 215 beats per minute.
Count me at 215.
That, doesn't really happen or make sense.
Watching him just take it and just keep trying to do it is another thing that a lot of musicians who really want it do. But I've dealt with this and I feel like at some levels it's made me a better musician.
That,
doesn't really happen or make sense.
But it actually does make sense because it's an abusive tirade and he's doing abusive things like chastising Neiman for not being able to do impossible tasks like reading tempo. But in this video, it's just considered an inaccuracy and not right because he can't remove his experience from this movie and add it into a different context. Like, he's not doing anything educational in this video, he's not reviewing the movie, he's just complaining. The next inaccuracy Adam mentions is the phrase double time swing. He can't really put his finger on as to why this sounds so inaccurate to him, but it's just this gut feeling.
That is a double time swing.
That, I don't know, technically makes sense.
Yes, does he use it in a way that's correct and correctly used in the movie?
It's J.K. Simmons' delivery of the line, as well as the insistent use of that phrase throughout the entire movie, which feels kind of off.
He can't explain it, no one knows what you're talking about, then there's this fucking clip which I'm just gonna play.
Then when Fletcher is menacing the band, he keeps referencing a, quote, out-of-tune player.
An out-of-tune player here.
The phrase would be probably, somebody is playing out of tune.
An out-of-tune player here.
Somebody is playing out of tune.
An out-of-tune player here.
Somebody is playing out of tune.
Okay, out of all the nitpicks he has in this movie, there is a rhetorical question he has that actually, like, makes you think. Fletcher tells a section of the horns to sharpen a ninth, but the thing with something like a trumpet is that it can only play one note at a time, so telling them to voice a ninth, which is something you want for a chord, that's usually reserved for piano players or guitar players, not necessarily horn players.
And for a character like Terrence Fletcher, singling out a particular player for humiliation seems like it's part of his character. So why they didn't do that and just said, brass sharp the ninth. Anyway.
My narrative answer is that within this point of the movie, we're past the first act, so the relationship between Fletcher and Neiman is already developed at this point. So actually, Fletcher screaming at someone else completely unrelated, it could actually lose some of its value compared to the screaming he does only at Neiman and the drummers. But my musical answer, again, because brass can only play one note at a time, a chord is a series of multiple notes. So if he's telling the brass section to sharpen that ninth, he probably is singling out a player because he's telling one player to play a certain note a certain way. But you know, that's just a theory. Maybe multiple horn players are sharpening their ninth, but I like to think it's kind of like this little nugget, little detail that's kind of neat. So Adam is just really condescending about this moment too. I hate that.
All of these moments have the cumulative effect of, say, an American actor speaking in kind of a bad British accent.
Otherwise, you get the point. He just keeps going on and on about these certain nitpicks that if I did it myself, I would just keep bashing the same point over and over. My main issue is that this just wastes everyone's time. Millions and millions of minutes have been wasted by watching this guy nitpick this movie. To me, it's kind of a shame that these details frustrate him because I think they actually add more to the movie.
Telling Andrew to tune the drum set to B flat.
Tune the set to B flat.
This is a super old school technique that was only really used when bands were playing in very horn friendly keys like B flat.
Which, considering the theming of this movie, like, they keep bringing up Charlie Parker for a reason, even though he died in the 1950s. So having this little detail where they have to do this thing to appease Fletcher, I like that more than I hate it. And it also shows a character trait about Fletcher, how he makes these students do these unimportant things just to keep them on edge, even though they have no value to the composition. How much is this really going to affect Caravan? Not that much, but we gotta do it. We just gotta do it.
It's not really wrong, but there's the issue of how Fletcher counts off.
Another detail Adam catches is the count off Fletcher has. He drops Chazelle's name here, stating even if he thinks it's right, which...
Even if Damien Chazelle thinks this is right, this sounds kind of wrong to me.
I almost feel like he knows this detail could be intentional. He attributes it that dancers will start a count off on 5, but not musicians. Where again, we're back at Thomas Pridgeon and what he states as a drummer. That because this gives you less time to properly jump into the song, it's received as a form of hazing. But all Adam does is just cringe. He just cringes.
The thing is that's a fairly old school way of counting off odd time signatures, and it's not really used that much anymore.
The count off is weird. It makes me cringe. I don't know. There just seems to be multiple old school techniques that Fletcher forces onto these students. But instead of seeing the pattern with Fletcher and being stuck in these old school techniques, Adam just points at all of these and goes wrong, wrong, and extra wrong. Again, you learn nothing about the movie through this. The way Adam presents it, you just learn useless trivia about count offs and drum tuning. It's not like there's there's a character in the movie that makes me do unnecessary things in order to appease him, that would be ridiculous. But then going even further, he acknowledges that the things Fletcher is doing are intentionally confusing to the movie.
That confusion actually exists in the movie during the abusive rushing, dragging scene, where Andrew gets confused and is counting in 7 briefly, but Fletcher then insists that he counts in 4.
Start counting.
5, 6, 7.
In 4, damn it!
But then he just kind of stops talking about that before doing anything interesting with it. He was almost there with how making Neiman go from 7/8 to 4/4 is disorienting and adds to the scene.
None of this so far, none of it, really affects anything. It doesn't affect the plot in any sort.
And you know what? He's right. The first 11 minutes in his video did not matter. But he kept talking. And he didn't stop talking. And now he's gonna keep talking. Oh, but I get mad that the first 11 minutes are just, haha, none of this really matters.
It's all just kind of been, you know, like astrophysicists complaining about Interstellar or what.
You just told me that nothing you said mattered. This is fucking useless. This is all fucking useless information. And the worst part is that it could have been useful because someone like Thomas made it useful, but you didn't. Both of you had Berkeley educations and only one of you did something good with it. But yeah, the nitpicking is also a complete tonal indicator of what the rest of this review is going to look like. Because when you review this movie as the only portrayal of jazz education instead of the psychological thriller it is, it's like reviewing The Shining for its portrayal of hospitality. Adam even compares what he's doing to an astrophysicist critiquing Interstellar, but yeah, you are doing that.
We just want to enjoy the movie on its own storytelling merit.
Can you see why that would make me a little peeved? But you know what? There is a video out there that I actually do like where a jazz musician reacts to Whiplash. In fact, it's only reacted to by a jazz drummer 1 year my senior. His name, Grayson, last name. I only bring him up because if I just so happen to bring up an example from this video to directly contradict what Adam's talking about, you won't be confused.
The mind game thing that he's playing with, I actually can relate to, where you start pinning people against each other, you start pinning yourselves against the person, this weird dynamic of like, clearly when he's saying, are you rushing or are you dragging? Well,
okay, so these first 11 minutes, useless. Could have been taken out of the video, right? Well, there's still 17 minutes left in this review of the movie. Adam says to move beyond the surface level aspects and get down to the deeper depths of the film.
So let's move beyond the surface level. Let's talk about the character of Terrence Fletcher.
To talk about the characters, maybe, to really get that relationship between Neiman and Fletcher talked about more, and how it's not just expressed through jazz education, but music in general.
I talked to a professor who teaches at a prestigious New York City jazz school, my good friend Josh Bailey, who teaches at NYU Steinhardt, and asked him what would happen if somebody like Terrence Fletcher actually taught young students today.
If I were to whiplash them, then they would be like, well, I'm going to not do this as my major and just switch to poli-sci.
Tanner switched to pre-med. I guess he got discouraged.
He proceeds to call one of his jazz professor friends and asks what would happen if someone like Terrence Fletcher were to teach at a jazz college. Then he mentions one of the recurring motifs of the movie, a story of how Charlie Parker became great, where jazz drummer Joe Jones threw a cymbal at Charlie Parker's head which inspired him to get better. Adam corrects the embellishments of this story, talks about how Fletcher is embellished himself, and his way of thinking is not unlike jazz professors cut from the cloth of the old school.
Professors who do some of the things that Fletcher does do exist. I mean, maybe not the level of abuse.
And that Chazelle probably only knows about an older cut of musicians before the 60s, which is an oddly keen detail to pick up on. For all of the things he just brushes off to the side as cringy, he just so happens to pick up on like this really, really specific detail.
Chances are Damien Chazelle isn't hip to these musicians either, but the characterization of the older musician who doesn't know anything about anything new is accurate, so there's that.
Okay, call me crazy, call me a psycho even, but based off what Adam is saying here and the tone of what he's saying, it sounds like he's saying that Chazelle's knowledge of older jazz in this movie isn't a limitation to the way the story is being told, but rather just him expressing a lack of knowledge of modern jazz, even though he also mentioned that Terrence Fletcher is just more of an old school teacher, but I guess he thinks that old school nature is just more of a coincidence rather than like this intentional thing. Like the most I can do is just read between the lines and speculate about what is specifically being said here. But I know he's saying something where he's making out the director to be dumber than he actually is. That much I do know. Like only focusing on old school ideals of jazz is portrayed as negative in this movie because Fletcher's the fucking villain. So even if Damien Chazelle only knew older jazz, he portrays it as a negative thing in this film. So there is the takeaway that, yeah, just don't get caught up on the legends. If you want to be the legend, you gotta be in the present. And I think Adam is right. I think Chazelle's knowledge of jazz probably has an older vision to it, but he's probably writing what he knows about. If Damien Chazelle knows who Joe Jones is, he can probably pick up on a good chunk of jazz around this time. What I'm saying is that I think Adam has this underlying grudge about this movie portraying something that is a large part of his identity. Because let's stop for a second and think about what Adam is doing right now. Instead of reviewing a movie like the title suggests, which would usually infer a deeper level of analysis and perspective, Adam is calling his jazz professor friend, who is clearly on some sort of campus, probably walking to his class, and asking, "Now, jazz professor, would an openly abusive, manipulative, violent, vicious, barbaric person be an effective teacher?" And guess what the guy says? He says fucking no.
If I were to whiplash them, then they would be like, well, I'm gonna not do this as my major and just switch to poli-sci.
Tanner switched to pre-med.
Adam then proceeds to come to the conclusion that Terrence Fletcher, the character written by a screenwriter with the intent of telling a story for a movie, is in fact a storytelling trope. Anything I did last night, I don't really remember it because I haven't bothered editing it. I like to think that I'm in a refreshed state of mind now. I can have a more even composure compared to how I was last night. Let's all take a deep breath. We trained for this, but truth be told, I'm exercising demons right now. The fact that one of the largest music education channels on YouTube allows themselves to be this narrow about something, it hurts something within me. For them to be so passionate about one topic in an artistic medium only to be completely ignorant about another artistic medium. And it is funny to me just to see how engaged these people get about the inaccuracies of this movie. Whenever people do talk about the inaccuracies, they talk about it twice as much as any other scene in any other movie. Like, yeah, you're supposed to be relaxed, so what does it mean when they're not doing that and they're doing something abnormal to what the status quo is? What is making them so tense that they are red in the face with blood and sweat, and they're parallel to someone who's just as tense but in a completely different direction? Not opting for approval like his students, but rather craving perfection from them, and that's where the connection in Whiplash lies. In the relationships, that's where all the electricity is, the emotion, humanity. If you want to look at technical skills, it's in the camera, not the drums. The color popping out the instruments but making everyone warmer and fleshier. Blood pops out more. The environment is practically stripped of any color that isn't warm. Not to mention the constant clashing of drums makes the room all that more airtight as we're just stuffed into this one corner with Fletcher blocking the door, trapping these students. All these elements come together to create just one scene, but the impact you get from that scene is bigger than any yes or no you can receive. It creates something special and formative inside of you, and that's where the experience comes from. And that's what I love the most. Not just about Whiplash, not just about movies, but creativity in general. I love the ability of the human mind to bend reality in a way that flourishes life. I'm just fucking with you. Fletcher's shirt isn't supposed to be black. You're not supposed to be tense while drumming. You're not supposed to look like a jock. You're not. Hey Adam, let's learn about the movie Whiplash. Oh, what's that? You got your friend to parrot every fucking opinion you stated so far? Since you're able to get connections, why not get a screenwriter for your video instead of one of your jazz professor friends, so that way you have like a different opinion from your own and you can get more insight? Listen, I love jazz and I love movies, but what I hate is when you let your ego blatantly get in the way of you enjoying something. For example, Adam brings up Buddy Rich, and we're going to talk about Buddy Rich for a good while, because even though he's not really in the movie that much, he's just kind of name dropped a few times. There's a video of him, there's a poster of him there. Overall, he's more of like a motif in the movie. Hey, that's a music term. Adam has an entire section dedicated to Buddy Rich in his video, and you can tell it's bad because he plays the lick in a very bad way.
Part 5. Buddy Rich. The movie's choice to have Andrew obsess over Buddy Rich is, I guess, narratively a good one.
So Buddy Rich is narratively a good choice. I mean, he's right. Buddy Rich is a narratively good choice. A lot of Rich's style was focused on being visual, to have very dramatic chops in his solos to be seen on a stage or on TV. And in terms of Buddy Rich's personality, he has a lot in relation with someone like Terrence Fletcher. He wanted perfection, and he would get angry and abusive when that wasn't met. And Adam mentions all of this. He even mentions these things called the bus tapes, which have been passed around by comedians for just how sharp Buddy Rich's tongue could be. There are lines lines in Seinfeld that are direct quotes from Buddy Rich, which, I mean, it's a little ironic that Buddy Rich is more influential to comedy than modern jazz, but that's another story. And actually, Adam has a closer degree of connection to Buddy Rich than I do. He had a mentor in Berkeley that was mentored by Buddy Rich, and yeah, Buddy Rich could be a monster sometimes. Adam confirms that yes, Neiman is obsessed with Buddy Rich in this movie, which actually, that detail is a lot more prevalent in the actual script itself than the final product of the movie. Control F and see how many times Buddy Rich is brought up, and he's a guy that's eerily similar to Fletcher, a parallel even. So it makes perfect movie sense. Adam says it makes perfect movie sense. So why does he keep talking? Well, because we have to talk about the perspective of a modern jazz student studying jazz in New York City in the modern era. And that if you take away the storytelling aspect of the movie, Buddy Rich actually doesn't make sense. Which, yeah, if you take away the things from the movie that make it a movie, suddenly, oh my gosh, it starts falling apart. Where did my foundation go? And again, I'm just gonna say it. This is not for an educational purpose. This is bias. What are we supposed to learn about that? What are we supposed to learn that actually jazz students don't study Buddy Rich? What are we supposed to learn about that? Hey Adam, can you get your jazz professor friend again to reaffirm everything you just said?
So like when you're talking about big band, like every semester someone references Buddy Rich. I don't hear that at all.
What are some drummers that a lot of students are checking out?
Nate Smith.
Oh, that's cool. Modern jazz students listen to modern jazz artists. That's crazy. It's too bad the movie doesn't do that. It just focused on a different jazz drummer rather than a perfectly accurate jazz drummer that we don't know if it'll stand the test of time, which this movie is striving for greatness, so yeah, they're going to choose a jazz drummer that stood the test of time and people still know the name of instead of a rando. Now, he mentions Buddy Rich's cult of personality, which is very much a real thing, and by that, I mean boomers who grew up with Buddy Rich. They will be extremely vocal about this guy. Now, that's not what's important. Actually, Adam brings up this article he references in his video.
Ethan Iverson goes into great detail on the subject in a really illuminating blog post on Whiplash. You should definitely check it out if you have the time.
So before I go any further into Adam's review, I want to look at the source he cites in his description. I read the article. I'm just gonna put up a picture of Ethan Iverson's face for no real reason, not a reason at all. It's just that when I say this article is one of the most blindly written things I have ever read, this is the worst thing I have ever read, at least in recent memory. At least anything that doesn't involve people dying horribly. This article starts with one sentence. That Whiplash is a movie that most general film goers have loved and a few jazz musicians have hated.
It was very polarizing, and a lot of people in the music community, especially the jazz community, didn't really like it.
I think it sets the tone pretty well for the rest of this article. Actually, no, the tone gets worse. Also, he has this image he constantly posts throughout, I think 6 times. I'm generalizing here. Everybody of all races has soul. American music is a mix of many different cultures. I'm just gonna ignore that. He mentions a drummer, Albert Heath, who is commonly referred to as Tootie Heath throughout his career professionally, and he talks about a tradition of music that derives from the background of his drumming, mentioning that in order to play a concert, you should have not have worked on music that day to ask ancestors for the permission to create. Even though I'm paraphrasing Iverson here, I don't know if he's paraphrasing Tootie. This could just be a paraphrase of a paraphrase. Most of the rhythms that power American music come from Africa. They were brought here on the slave ships. Okay. So Iverson's article talks less about Whiplash, and he would rather just talk about American music history, which honestly is like the most video essay introduction I've ever heard. So before we talk about Whiplash, I want to talk about where jazz came from in the beginning of America. Okay, let me summarize it as best as possible. African rhythms, European 12-tone harmony, put them together in a blender and jazz came from it. He describes it as an ecstasy through communion before dropping a few big jazz artists like Duke Ellington and Sonny Greer, the guy who played drums for Duke Ellington. Okay, so I'm trying to wrap this article back around to Whiplash, but it just keeps talking about, like, a drum set. What is a drum set? And then he says all the greatest American drummers specialize in feel. Also, I should mention, at the top of this page, there are pictures of Tony Williams and Elvin Jones. They are 2 of the drummers associated with Miles Davis and John Coltrane. With Tony and Elvin, feel is the most important thing. It's impossible for me to imagine them picking up a stick without swinging. Okay, when does he talk about the fucking movie? Iverson specifically quotes Chazelle saying he wanted to model the movie after Rich's big band style. So before I get further into this article, this is a rare opportunity to actually talk about Whiplash in this article. So you know how in Whiplash, Fletcher teaches a big band? So compared to using a big band drummer to someone like Tony Williams or Elvin Jones, because they specialized in like quintets, quartets, trios, you name it, nothing of the big band variety though. It makes more sense for a movie that focuses on big band jazz to use a big band drummer like Buddy Rich rather than someone like Tony Williams, which focused on more modest groups. And then Ethan Iverson brings up another jazz drummer, Mel Lewis, and he brings up a story just to say Buddy Rich does chops, Mel Lewis does feeling, and as a drummer you want feeling. So Buddy Rich doesn't do that. He fucking sucks. Like, if I sound dismissive about this article, it's just because he never talks about the fucking movie. To another extent, I understand where Iverson is coming from as a musician. Okay, so if you ask anyone what their favorite drummer is, they'll probably tell you, I don't know. But if you go to like my 50-year-old gift shop manager, they'll tell you their favorite drummer is like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin. Or if I ask a metalhead what the best drummer in the world is, they'll tell you it's the guy from Dream Theater. Oh, what's that? Your song has 100 different time signature changes? Oh, that must mean it's like a good song. Listen, I gotta bring out the elitist in me. I fucking hate talking to metalheads. Metalheads kind of have this mentality where they think pufferfish is like the best food ever just because of how difficult it is to prepare. You know what I mean? So if I am Ethan Iverson, the man, the legend, who immerses himself deeply in jazz, and I have to see the entire world tell me that this guy is a better drummer just because he played on Johnny Carson and he played really fast, not only would I be annoyed, I would be rightfully annoyed. And Adam Neely are probably thinking about how Neiman wants to be one of the greats in this movie. They didn't get the right jazz drummer to be one of the greats in jazz. Something like that. You know, there's an error in translation there, I guess. But like Adam said, Buddy Rich is a good storytelling device. And I'm going to tell you about this huge secret in storytelling. Not many people know about it, but there's this thing. When you write a story and you write things in that story, sometimes you can put this thing called irony. Because I think we can both grasp that like big band jazz isn't popular in like pop culture. As far as I'm concerned, every other student that isn't Neiman actually might keep up with like modern jazz, but we don't talk to them in the movie. Instead, we just focus on Neiman, and his big inspiration is Buddy Rich. Again, I'm in theory territory, but a part of me likes to think Fletcher knows like Neiman just doesn't know that much in jazz. For example, Neiman doesn't come from a sophisticated jazz background. He just kind of comes because he wants to do drums. It makes sense that Fletcher would bring up a jazz drummer that Neiman's parents might know about, because they're a more casual audience towards jazz, so they might look at someone like Buddy Rich and say, oh, well, they're cool. And then Neiman just kind of carried on that, and he never really grew out of that, which is another character flaw of him. And again, Buddy Rich is a narratively good choice for many, many reasons. And if you look into the details of this video, it tells you because Buddy Rich is not that important to jazz, it's even more of an implication that Neiman is heading towards doom. Jazz greats in a big band setting like that are doomed to fail, especially if they're trying to be a modern jazz great. But mainly the takeaway is, well, their takeaway is completely different from that. And again, this isn't just beginner's luck or anything. Damien is writing from his experience as a drummer in high school. A big band jazz drummer in high school. Ooh. Yes, is that a different story in semantics? Of course it is. It's not the same as a college, but I mean, it's more experience than what I have doing jazz drumming. So yeah, the choice of having Buddy Rich be more of a focus in this movie, it's a lot more deliberate than they're letting it on to be. As Iverson's article progresses, he starts splitting drumming into two categories. He mentions stage drumming, which is like the fast physical drumming that you see in Whiplash, you know, something for the cameras. But then there's swing drumming, which is a lot more influential towards how jazz drumming really is, and that's not what the movie does. But more than that, Iverson distinguishes these two forms of drumming as very black and white. Literally, I literally mean he makes stage drumming white and swing drumming black. He's not wrong, but where is he going with this? Talks about Joe Jones and how he influenced jazz drumming, just really derails for a minute here. Like, I have to skip literal paragraphs of this article because it means nothing. Okay, Iverson talks about jazz education, like, you know, the setting of Whiplash. There's a guy called Stan Kenton. Based on this article, he seems to be the father of jazz education. First jazz program was in 1947 at North Texas State University, which emphasized big band drumming because it was 1947. Next jazz program was 20 years later in 1967, so for a while, only place you could learn was North Texas University. Iverson brings this all up just to say that in the grand scheme of jazz, North Texas University is not part of a serious discussion of modern jazz. Where the fuck are we? Then he gives this backhanded compliment about Whiplash being a hit movie. He mentions Sun Ra somewhere. Again, I have to skip literal paragraphs because he starts talking about like odd meters because Whiplash is in 7/4. Brings up Igor fucking Stravinsky because the Rite of Spring was in an odd time signature. Okay, where am I right now? Ta-Nehisi Coates article on reparations for African Americans. Oh my god. So by reparations, he means that in the grand scheme of music, jazz history has been kinder to black people rather than like something like rock music. But by Whiplash existing and using Buddy Rich in the movie instead of Elvin Jones, the scales are gonna tip and white people will rule the history of jazz. I'm not directly quoting him obviously, but that's pretty much what he says. And guess what? That didn't happen when Whiplash came out, it didn't happen when this article came out, it didn't happen when Adam Neely's video came out, and it hasn't happened now. Duke Ellington and Miles Davis are still the forefront of jazz greats. They're still on the Mount Rushmore. Buddy Rich didn't chisel his face on there. Still Duke, still Miles. So Iverson dies from here in order to attack the film's composer, Justin Hurwitz, which I'll just read the quote Iverson excerpted from an interview of Chazelle's. So this is just from an interview of Damien Chazelle. Hurwitz plays the piano, yet his education was mostly classical without a jazz background. It's a huge regret looking back because it's such a different language, and it's a little like spoken languages where the younger you are, the easier and better you soak up the rules and syntax of all of it. Yet Hurwitz has gotten an intensive jazz program working on Chazelle's last 2 films. Damien put me on a steady diet of jazz, both American and French music scores, he says. Basically, I had an independent study with Damien the last couple years of college, and now I use jazz idioms more today than I learned in musical theory class. Iverson is upset by this, but he doesn't really explain why, he just kind of keeps talking about something else. So I'm just going to have to inference that Iverson is upset because Hurwitz studied soundtracks in order to make a jazz soundtrack for a movie. And you know what, at first it's like, oh, of course he's going to study scores in order to make a score, but I get why Iverson can be a little frustrated by this. I do understand. If the impression you get is that you focused on soundtracks over jazz, I understand why the frustration can be there. And you know what, in my opinion, because of this, it does make Whiplash sound more derivative as a soundtrack. Which thematically, it does fit into the movie because it's a bunch of students playing standards and stuff like that. You know, it's made to sound a little amateur, just a little, so like thematically, it does work pretty well. So I don't really have any complaints for the soundtrack in regards to that. Basically, if this is your only source of big band jazz, go listen to something else. But in terms of how it functions in the movie, it's almost pitch perfect. Get it? But again, I haven't really listened to the Whiplash soundtrack outside of listening to a song or two just to kind of hear it a little bit more clearly. If you want to create a great soundtrack that stands out on its own and not just confined into the movie, then you have to look outside of the world of soundtracks. It took me a really long time to find out that Purple Rain was a soundtrack just because like it's just so good as its own album, and its influence doesn't come from other soundtracks, although it might borrow from a couple, but its main inspiration is just borrowing from contemporary scenes. I mean, Prince was literally part of a thing called the Minneapolis Sound. Being part of that scene and applying it to the movie creates a much more effective soundtrack. I can't say so much about the movie, I haven't seen it, but also I think it's kind of telling that I didn't know Purple Rain was even a movie, but you know what, soundtrack more than makes up for it. But in terms of what Whiplash is going for to like fit thematically in the movie, it's not trying to revolutionize jazz in its movie. And because of that, you shouldn't only listen to the Whiplash soundtrack if you want big band jazz. Go listen to like Duke Ellington if you haven't. And this is another point I wanted to bring up. Whiplash's budget is so piss poor. So in order to actually make a soundtrack for this movie, it relies a lot more on who you know rather than trying to find the perfect like person to make this soundtrack, because you just don't have the resources to do that. You just have to get your composer friend and make them study jazz for a few years because they're your friend. This movie was created out of a lot of limitation, and Chazelle, in my opinion, makes the most out of that as much as he can. Does it mean that Whiplash is the shape of jazz to come? No, but it's not crazy that some guy would study French music scores. Don Ellis, the guy who first recorded Whiplash, also worked on movie soundtracks like The French Connection, which isn't a French movie soundtrack, it just has the word French in its name. So for this movie to use the guy that recorded Whiplash as an inspiration more than someone like Ornette Coleman, it doesn't come from ignorance, it comes from doing what's best for the movie. And he's upset that Justin Hurwitz was a film score composer that learned about jazz rather than growing up with jazz and becoming a film score composer after the fact. He is mad that someone did research for a movie and then applied said research to the movie. And then Iverson just says the dumbest thing. I'm about to have a stroke reading this. I've kept my temper pretty cool so far, but this is about to give me an aneurysm.
This is where I get jealous of hip-hop. hip-hop has guarded its black sovereignty so well.
40 years after the genre was born, the question of who gets to be a hip-hop star remains a racial flashpoint.
Imagine if, for a movie about hip-hop, the composer said he was new to this style, so he studied Eminem and Iggy Azalea, not to mention the founding father of French spoken word and sexy style, Serge Gainsbourg.
I don't even know where to begin with this fucking thing. Okay, the Milwaukee Public Museum quotes sovereignty as the right of a nation or group of people to be self-governing. So by that logic, the CEO of UMG still looks like this. And there's nothing that says black sovereignty than someone like Leo Cohen, who sucked millions out of like black artists.
I borrowed $700 from my mom, and I made 36 G's that night.
You got all those orders for $700 back then?
Well, I was short $700. It was nothing. They were all unsigned.
And he's rewarded by being the global head of music on YouTube. Like, yeah, is the image of hip-hop predominantly African-American? I'm gonna tell you, it doesn't come from the good of UMG's heart. And even if they wanted the image of hip-hop to stay white, it doesn't fucking happen. Look at Post Malone now. He's a country artist, and I just saw Jack Harlow singing Elvis, which, oh, that's a little on the nose. For Ethan Iverson to say this without like a hint of irony or sarcasm, like 100% serious, it shows such a blatant disregard for having a willingness to scope out other cultures than the one that you are a part of. Because let's ask ourselves, if jazz is a primarily black genre, then how come it didn't keep its sovereignty? Well, let's ask our good friend Miles Davis. Fewer and fewer black musicians were playing jazz, and I could see why. Because jazz was becoming the music of the museum. A lot of musicians and critics are at fault for letting it happen. No one wants to be dead before their time, you know, when they're 21. And that's what was going to happen to someone who went into jazz. At least that's the way it looked to me. The only way that wasn't going to happen was if somehow they got the ear of the young people again, and I didn't see that happening. I didn't even go to listen to most jazz groups anymore, because they were only playing the same musical licks that we played way back with Bird, over and over again, that along with some of the things that Coltrane introduced, and maybe Ornette, it was boring to hear that shit. These musicians have become victims of the critics, most of whom are lazy and don't want to work too hard to understand contemporary musical expression and language. That's too much work for them, so they just put it down every time. Dumb, insensitive critics have destroyed a lot of great music and musicians who just weren't as strong as I was in having the ability to just say, fuck y'all. So if you want an analysis of Whiplash, just read that paragraph instead of Iverson's article, but it also exemplifies how jazz is an institution now. You don't learn jazz in jazz clubs anymore, you go to university and study it there. A large strength of hip-hop is how it's maintained contemporary expression, but it's not because you go to the school of rap to learn rap music. No, it's very much a culture that shares ideas with each other and encourages innovation more than jazz has in the last 60 years. Iverson himself is a faculty member of the New England Conservatory in Boston, Massachusetts, and I have just a small hunch of intuition that a private school made in 1867 doesn't have the best regards for black sovereignty. But no, Whiplash is the movie that's celebrating the white image in jazz, not private educational institutions that Adam and Ethan are a part of. Let's put the blame on a movie where a jazz school is the setting, because one of the concluding statements in this article is Iverson saying, and I quote, "In light of the Whiplash phenomenon, I have no problem saying that if you think Buddy Rich is the greatest jazz drummer, you are racist." A conclusion that he came to because this movie talked about Buddy Rich one too many times. And you want to know the cherry on top? You want to know that delicious succulent cherry on top? He says that when the topic of contemporary jazz comes up, much of the black intelligentsia isn't that interested.
The more you listen, the more you realize how profound it is. Like, limitlessly profound.
He's saying that black people aren't interested in jazz. He's literally saying that black people aren't interested in jazz anymore. And his heart, his poor frail heart, was broken when a man named Jamel Bowie said they liked Whiplash. On the other hand, why would Bowie know that there was anything wrong with Whiplash? That was just some jazz stuff, right? Got nothing to do with real black music like hip-hop.
It's pretty intellectual. It's pretty untheatrical.
It's a perception that just has to change. When it does change, for example, when we collectively understand the annihilation of the devotional African aesthetic from Whiplash, we could go back to admiring Mr. Buddy Rich for his undoubted excellence. Until that changes, dues need to be paid. You know, so my big takeaway from this article is that, yeah, Ethan, you certainly are generalizing. Thank God you put the same fucking image 6 times to let us know you're just generalizing. So instead of looking deep down inside and seeing the problems within himself, he wanted to see what the problems in Whiplash were, and he came to the conclusion that the problem was the movie's racist. But in order to do the mental gymnastics that Ethan did in order to say that, oh, Whiplash is racist, I think you have to be way more racist than Whiplash ever was.
But then, at the end of the day, I really believe in simplicity.
Okay, so the goal I had in the beginning of this video was to figure out the question, why do jazz musicians hate Whiplash so much? This whole time I've been seeing held back or not so held back judgment of the movie, but I've never had the question answered. But I'll say this, Adam Neely doesn't answer the question, but he has an answer to the question. So he brings up this one drummer, Peter Erskine. He played in Weather Report, which is a jazz fusion band in the 70s, and obviously he's done some other things, but the important thing is that this guy is a jazz drummer. So he had an interview with PBS Southern California about the movie Whiplash and his response to it. I understand now. I at least understand why a jazz musician would get frustrated at Whiplash. And I'll tell you why, because the guy asking questions, hey, have you ever seen a character like Terrence Fletcher? What do you think the takeaway jazz students will get from this film, you know? It's specifically asking jazz-related questions about a movie where jazz is only the setting, not the subject, really. And you know what? The guy answers properly. He says, yeah, I don't think jazz students are going to take a lot from this movie. That wasn't the goal of the movie. The goal of the movie wasn't to show you how fun music is. It's to show you fucking abuse. I wanted to talk about this one scene in The Sopranos. And one of the things they have is this episode where Tony's hanging out with these rich, preppy people at a golf club. So in this episode, they're asking Tony about Al Capone, John Gotti, The Godfather, all this sort of stuff. That one little scene in The Godfather, did it really happen? Tony just kind of fucks with them and says, yeah, it did happen. But that's the point. It's not a jazz movie. It's a psychological drama. It's all in the head. I really understand now how all of these people can get the tunnel vision they do. Do I think it's acceptable? I still think there is ultimately a goal where you have to put aside your differences about this movie in order to look at it a little bit more objectively. Which at first I thought the issue was that they were looking at it too objectively, but that's not what bias is. Bias is very subjective. It's someone's subjection getting in the way of objectivity. Like the actual things that happen in the movie aren't being seen because of this thing getting in the way of their vision. Seeing this interview and seeing this guy say, have you seen anyone like Terrence Fletcher in real life?
You're a dumb fuck! A dumb fuck!
It's like, no, of course not. It's a character. It's a character in a movie. But now I'm seeing that jazz musicians kind of overthink and they even overcompensate. All jazz musicians have to say is, oh, I've never seen a character like Fletcher because he's a character. But they go too far. They say, hey, what if someone taught like Fletcher at a jazz college? Let me get my jazz friend and ask him, what if Fletcher taught at a jazz school? And they're going to say, oh, well, it's a character, so they wouldn't teach you. And also, if you look at some comments on these videos, there are people that say, oh yeah, I've had an experience like Whiplash, where I've had like an abusive band director. Like people who let their ego get in the way so much of like what you're actually supposed to be doing in these things. It made me hate playing music. I don't want to do that again. I've had this type of experience. It's awful. Not only is Whiplash not accurate, you shouldn't want it to be accurate. It should not be accurate, because if it is, that means like...
Last month he hanged himself in his apartment.
As J.K. Simmons said in his interview, there's people out there like Terrence Fletcher who are, you know, psychotic.
Completely just doesn't care about what collateral damage there may be, and that, you know, I mean, that's the central debate of the film, really, is, you know, what cost is too great.
And it's mainly just because of people going up to them with their Jay Leno voices going, is that what jazz music is like? Jazz musicians should also be able to say, oh, it's just a movie, so I'm gonna watch it like a movie instead of how accurate it is to jazz, instead of making a 28-minute video where 11 minutes of it is just nitpicking small details like, oh, look at this extra in the scene for 5 seconds. He doesn't have the right backpack on. It's supposed to have wheels on. Not only is that stupid, it's dumb. With the takeaway from this PBS article and from Iverson's article, which still one of the worst things I've read in recent memory. But the takeaway from Iverson's article was that Whiplash had the responsibility to be accurate to jazz, and that they were supposed to inform people of a more accurate jazz culture in the movie. But no, it's not Whiplash's responsibility to tell people about jazz culture and history. That's actually your responsibility, Ethan. But you know what? Inadvertently, the movie actually did make you do that, so I don't know. How the fuck did Adam call that article awesome? I don't even remember how to incorporate it back into the video. Okay, so Buddy Rich's inclusion in the movie made perfect movie sense, but okay. But if you're a jazz student like Neiman, it's inaccurate. Don't you just love how Adam perfectly understands why Buddy Rich is in this movie as like a storytelling device and then completely disregards that because like apparently Buddy Rich was brought up in this movie so much that someone decided to bring up reparations because of it. Yeah, bringing up Buddy Rich in a movie is gonna corrupt the history of jazz. Ooh! Jazz is gonna rewrite the history books, said Ethan Iverson as he said writing about the history of jazz. Yeah, so teenagers that are trying to be jazz students, they're not gonna go back and listen to Buddy Rich. I'm gonna tell you right now, a lot of teenagers aren't gonna go back and listen to Buddy Rich. And you know what? It's just fucking pointless to even bring this up in the first place. I don't know what kind of trauma this movie inserted into you, but you gotta fucking let it go. Because you're trying to fit this movie into a mold that it's not trying to be. And listen, I understand people are trying to fit their own perceptions of this movie into you. You didn't have to make this video dissecting Whiplash's accuracy in jazz education, because that's not what it was trying to do as a movie. So what do we get? We get these videos that try to undermine the movie by ignoring the message and focusing on nitpicking on details instead. And when we do notice that these things are storytelling tropes, we're just gonna ignore it because jazz students wouldn't listen to Buddy Rich. Makes perfect movie sense in the movie. Let's explain that instead of trying to make the movie something it's not. Okay, this angle's hurting my neck way more than I thought it would. Let's just... Alright, now it's time for Adam to talk about the soundtrack, because, you know, it's
supposed to be a student band anyway, so I guess it actually kind of works. If this is the movie that gets people exposed to modern jazz big band music, I'm okay with it, especially with the dramatic use of the chart Caravan in the final scene.
He perfectly explains why the soundtrack is the way it is and then completely ignore all of that.
What doesn't work for me is the rest of the soundtrack.
He'll talk about how the soundtrack is a little unrefined, had a limited budget, but the crew made the most out of what they could do. And for the most part, I feel like they used these limitations to their advantage.
I do know that this was a film with a limited budget, so they couldn't hire, like, say, the Metropole Orchestra to record it.
So aside from the things I mentioned, apparently the soundtrack fails on every single account.
It's supposed to be jazz, but honestly, it fails on every single account.
All of them? All of the accounts? Oh shit. So he mentions the music Fletcher plays at the jazz club.
The music that Fletcher plays is easily the most milquetoast, boring, and flat jazz you could possibly imagine.
Which to me is kind of a shame that's his takeaway from that scene, because I think it actually does fit into Fletcher's character.
It is mediocrity defined. If Joe Jones was there, he definitely would have dropped the cymbal. It is a parody of the Starbucks jazz that Fletcher supposedly disliked.
I guess it just boils down to whether that's intentional or not, but I like to think there's a certain degree of attention, mainly just because, like again, there's people who are experienced in jazz in this movie. It's not like this is their perception of what a jazz club is like, at least I feel like it isn't. But you remember that point about the limited budget? Just throw it out the window. It doesn't even matter anymore. Because the thing with Fletcher is that he can play jazz. I mean, he's in a jazz university, but he's not a jazz great himself. So thematically, I feel like this type of song fits in. We've heard other music Fletcher strives to achieve, and it's nothing like the music he's playing. He's playing like the smooth bossa nova type thing, something you wouldn't hear in his big band. Thematically, I think it fits that he plays kind of boring jazz, because once he's exiled from Schaefer Conservatory, he's lost a lot of his power. Like, I mean, he's still able to get a group of musicians together and have them perform like one big performance at the end. But in terms of developing talent, it's not going to be at a university anytime soon. I think there's more depth to his character that he would criticize Starbucks jazz one moment and then play it immediately after. Because I think it's in Fletcher's character to project. Again, I don't know the degree that this was intentional, but it just fits really well in the movie to me, and the guys that learned jazz for this movie didn't learn it from Kenny G. There was clearly a palette that was developed prior to this movie, and I think they used that palette pretty effectively. So as I was talking about the actual movie, Adam decides to bring up his own experience at a jazz club where he says, oh, this is what they actually play at a jazz club.
This is closer to what you would hear in the West Village. I recorded this at Robert Glasper's residency That's not what we got in the movie.
Why didn't they do this in the movie? Well, it's like the reason they didn't play jazz fusion is because it's not in Fletcher's character to play jazz fusion. He's an old timer. He's old fashioned. He's stuck in his ivory tower, as Adam mentioned. Even if you wanted this jazz club to be accurate, it would go against Fletcher's character. So trying to shove this idea of what it should be is just not gonna work. You're trying to shove a square piece into a triangle hole.
We got the Little Tykes version of jazz.
He's talking about Charlie Parker and not insert modern jazz musician here, because another theme of this movie is like the mythology of these jazz greats. When you're in a modern jazz setting, you don't have the mythology yet. You might have some guy that's considered better than the others, but in terms of actual mythology and stories and the narrative, no. Which is another flaw of trying to view this movie in terms of sheer accuracy to New York jazz culture. And again, for a song like this, they probably just had to like put something in there, because again, their budget isn't that high. They weren't set on like making this one song super accurate. We need a song for Fletcher to play in this one scene. All right, cook it up. We don't have much budget, which you already mentioned, Adam. Let Fletcher play this. That's probably how it went. But the same issue in this video lies time and time again. Adam's insight adds absolutely no context to Whiplash. And if it does add context, it's because I have to look between the lines of what he's saying.
This scene made me more annoyed than I thought I would be going into the movie.
He doesn't have any outside perspective of how to perceive this movie. There's no one else to tell him why a scene might be the way it is. No, he just has to get jazz people to keep telling him, nah, this would have happened, this would have happened, this would have happened. Like, Adam's goalposts are in a completely different direction towards where this movie is trying to go. And then he brings up the excerpt from Iverson's article, which is an excerpt from the interview about Justin Hurwitz.
Damien put me on a steady diet of jazz. Both American and French music scores, he says. Ethan Iverson's blog post replies to this suitably incredulously.
He also brings up the black sovereignty moment. Okay, so the conclusion Adam has for the Whiplash soundtrack is that it doesn't have a love for jazz.
The movie has very little love for the art of jazz. Instead, it's all about competition and perfectionism and sweat and blood and overcoming the obstacles. This is a sports movie.
You're almost there, Adam. You're almost there. You just have to look at the first sentence of a Wikipedia article. Like, genuinely, what the fuck did you think this movie was about? A jazz movie? Have you ever heard of a jazz movie before? Not a documentary, no, a movie. A specifically scripted movie where it was shot and directed and it was about jazz. How many movies are like that? If a movie has jazz in it, then that's a setting, not a genre. Like, in the same way, Spinal Tap isn't a rock movie, it's a fucking comedy. You look at something like Rocky, that's not a boxing movie, that's a movie that has boxing as its, like, storytelling device.
Playing faster, I guess? Is that what people think practicing is? Is this what people think jazz school is?
Yes, the movie sacrifices accuracies and technical aspects of how a jazz big band is regularly set up for the sake of making the movie feel more like a movie to heighten the drama. But the movie is mean-spirited.
What made me truly think that this movie is a sports movie, and kind of a mean-spirited one at that, are the ridiculous practice scenes. Not only the ones where Andrew is playing, I guess, so much and so fast his hands start to bleed.
Yeah. What do you think's under here? Also, here. And yeah, this one's pretty bad.
And then Adam brings up the interview snippet with the director where he talks about how he wants to do things in the movie regarding Fletcher and Neiman. Because again, the movie focuses more on their relationship rather than jazz.
I know the point in these scenes is to show the physical nature of music.
I did want this movie to kind of flirt with the ideas of physical violence and the sort of physical toll.
But if you're hurting yourself while you're practicing, you're not gonna get any better, bottom line. I know the point in these scenes.
If you're hurting yourself, you're not going to get better, bottom line. If only there was a movie that let you know if by hurting yourself you weren't going to be better. I wish there was a movie that like portrayed that message like really transparent. If there for some reason he brings up his dumbass practice routine, oh, what's that, you practice for 5 hours on the bass? That's great, Adam, I'm so proud of you. Gold star, great job.
Just watch my 5-hour practice routine video. That's a lot closer to what actual practice at an actual conservatory actually is.
Oh, that's more accurate to how a jazz routine usually is instead of like a 1-minute montage. Dude, save some pussy for the rest of us. Like, as far as I'm concerned, Neiman could have been training for 5 hours, but yeah, it's not gonna like, it's a time lapse. Like, there's this thing where they skip time in movies. And I get it, the thing Adam is doing usually requires a lot of mental strength. I'm an impatient fuck. But then again, I don't really have the goal of being a bassist at that skill level anyways. If you want your mentality to display anger to the point of physical frustration, yeah, you'd rather have them punch through a drum kit in the movie to really emphasize like how angry they are instead of, I don't know, fuck. Okay, what's the big conclusion Adam has in this video?
And I think the thing that the movie Whiplash gets the most wrong about young people studying music today. Part 8. Music is, like, fun.
Music's fun. Did you know that? Music is fun. He brings up the Peter Erskine review where they were specifically asked the question, what takeaway do you think jazz students will get from this movie? Do I think Peter is completely right? No, but I understand where he's coming from because he was specifically asked that question. But this movie isn't about how learning music is really fun for everyone. If you want that, go watch fucking School of Rock. I haven't seen School of Rock. Is that what it's about? Maybe it's more like Whiplash than I thought. I don't know. Maybe Jack Black throws a cymbal at a kid.
Musicians make music because they love music. None of that is really apparent in the film, in my opinion.
But for someone like Adam to walk into Whiplash expecting it to tell them how fun music is, yeah, you set yourself up to be fucking disappointed. That's my bottom line. You're a dumbass.
Nobody really seems to care about music. No student turns to another student and says, have you checked out this drummer? Or, hey man, were you at the session at Smalls last night?
And it's like, yeah, even though music is supposed to be fun, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be fun for everyone. Chances are you're trying to develop livelihood from it, and anything you try to develop livelihood from, or just like push yourself too much to do something, yeah, of course, you lose its fun. How many jazz students actually think music is fun? You know what I mean? I'll be honest, man, I walked around my campus a lot, and I would always see like some band kids practice like in a distant field. It just like, it kind of scared me, like their aura scared me. Like they were all wearing shades and like had straight faces. Some of them even had buzz cuts. Scary. Like the vibe I got from them wasn't that music was fun. It was more like if I made a mistake, I'm gonna get shot in the head. And again, like any other field in any other industry, it's not crazy that you would lose your enjoyment in this thing. Yeah, is music supposed to be fun? Of course it is. But you know what? It's not a perfect world out there. Yeah, I get sad sometimes. Sometimes I get too sad to like make art or music. Yeah, being creative is meant to be fun. In fact, it's so fun it encouraged you to make the worst fucking skit I've ever seen in my life.
Dude, you gotta check out this video. It's Rajesh Mahanthappa playing with Vijay Iyer at the Jazz Standard. Oh, it's so killing. Oh, dude, after this, we gotta check out Steve Lehman.
Yeah, the singular and idiosyncratic world of comedy doesn't really apply with Adam's sketch. But really, if you love anything, then it's a relationship. And relationships are complicated. And it's really fucking ironic for Adam to dismiss a movie about abuse because it never happened to him.
Professors who do some of the things that Fletcher does do exist. I mean, maybe not the level of abuse.
Yes, none of the students in the movie talk to each other about music. Is it because Neiman isolates himself from the rest of the students? And also, Neiman is just kind of an asshole who only cares to appease Fletcher because that's gonna prove his greatness. Not friends, not his girlfriend, not his family, no, only Fletcher. I think that is the thing a lot of people miss, is that Neiman is just like a straight up asshole.
So Fordham was just like a random school?
No, I applied to a bunch of schools and Fordham let me in. Why'd you pick Schaefer?
It's the best music school in the country.
But no, actually, you know what? No, this movie just hates music, I think. I think that's what the big takeaway is. If Adam struggles to find a love of music in Whiplash, I struggle even more to find a love of Whiplash in this review.
Camaraderie and love of music are not apparent at all in the movie Whiplash, which is fine because it wants to tell a different story.
Complete diffusal of everything we were just talking about for the last I don't even know how long.
The jazz culture and the setting of New York City are merely ancillary to the plot and the characters of the story.
Oh, well, Whiplash isn't accurately trying to portray the things I'm talking about, so don't be surprised when they're not in the movie. I'm not surprised they're not in the movie. And then he just says that, yeah, jazz education is just a setting for the movie. I feel like I'm being gaslit. There's no way I just sat through this review for half an hour watching this guy move goalposts in every conceivable way only to say at the end, oh, it's just a movie.
It's decoration. It's all kind of detritus from the memory of a young director that's been reappropriated for telling a specific sort of story.
And that's what frustrates me because I can't put it into like perfect words the way I want to because it's just so fucking sneaky. And you know what? The worst part is that this video could have worked out if Adam just made more of an effort to use jazz education to enlighten the movie rather than take away context from it. But that's not what happens in the video. The video is establish the relationship between the movie and context of jazz education, then remove said context from the movie, and that's what every segment is. If you want to add an educational benefit, I would have emphasized limitations of the movie to show how it was made. I think think it would have been better to explain why those flaws might be there in regards to the actual limitations of the movie, which is what I'm trying to show in this video to the best of my ability, of course. But in order to do that, I gotta get really, really frustrated at a lot of videos.
You know, a memory that's always been very present in my mind. And it just occurred to me, you know, a few years ago that maybe it could actually make a movie.
Jazz, for Damien Chazelle, seems to be almost an emotional reaction to his experiences from high school, rather than something that he genuinely enjoys doing.
He condescendingly says that, yeah, Damien Chazelle's experience in big band in high school is something he has more of an emotional reaction to than something he really enjoys doing. You do realize he's a fucking director now, right? And then I consider this victimization, where he goes, Whiplash is the only portrayal of jazz education because that's about him.
And narratively, yeah, I get it. I understand why certain choices were made. But remember, Whiplash is the only portrayal of jazz education in popular culture. It's the only one.
That sentence is about him specifically. I assume he's saying that because people came up to him and said, oh, does your jazz professor slap you in the face? And he feels obligated to pick out fact from fiction. But no, the simple fact is that you're insecure about the movie. Also, you know that one scene where Fletcher has that brief moment of vulnerability where one of his students died? One of the most important scenes in the movie, in my opinion. What does Adam say about it?
Marsalis made him third trumpet at Lincoln Center. A year later, he was first.
Ugh, this isn't right at all.
I find out this morning that Sean died yesterday in a car accident.
Ugh, this isn't right at all.
Picking out fact from fiction doesn't mean looking at the background extra that appears for 5 seconds and saying, nope, I'll tell you right now, Rick Beato didn't get that fucking takeaway from your video. He made the dumbest fucking video I've ever seen.
Whiplash, for me, was a great movie with excellent direction, just tight, exciting, amazing, but it got jazz kind of wrong.
So for a movie that got jazz kind of wrong, he still decides to put the clip of Miles punching the drum over and over again while overlaying footage of his 5-hour practice routine. Oh my fucking god. Any fucking person with self-esteem would not have to compare themselves to a training montage in a movie. That is so fucking insecure. You're insecure. So here's my takeaway from Adam's review. There is insight about the movie, but every time there is insight, he will completely ignore it and move a goalpost in a completely opposite direction that the movie wasn't trying to go for. Oh, is Buddy Rich a good narrative choice for the movie? Well, jazz students would have listened to Buddy Rich in real life. Oh, the soundtrack makes sense in relation to the budget and experience of the composer. Oh, well, the movie doesn't accurately portray a jazz club, even though the movie is about big band jazz mostly, so the soundtrack is going to be mostly big band jazz. I'm sorry the one corner they cut upset you so much that you decided to compare it to Little Tykes. I'm so fucking sorry. Wait. What am I talking about? You said the movie was well directed and acted.
Whiplash, for me, was a great movie with excellent direction, just tight, exciting, amazing, but it got jazz kind of wrong.
Man, it's a good thing you bookended your video with that statement, even though you spent more time showing a recording of a jazz club you went to. It's kind of insane that of all the videos I have seen where jazz musicians react to this movie, the best insight I have seen from anyone was a 20-year-old drummer, who admittedly I didn't talk about as much as I thought I would, but this is my opportunity to. He had the most level-headed insight into this movie and was able to talk about, oh, this mental thing they did here is accurate to how I feel.
Neem is just staring at Fletcher, and I may have done that once or twice. We'll just leave it at that.
Grayson is a drummer with a competitive mindset, so many of the things Neiman feels he also relates to and is able to expand upon those things in the video. He lets you know that the things Fletcher does makes him a fucking lunatic rather than saying yes or no to the certain thing he does. Okay, I might have been a little blinded when I watched this video for the first time because he very, very much definitely does do the accuracy thing, but to be fair, he is in front of a drum kit, so I guess it makes more sense for him to do something like that. I'll give him a pass because, again, he was like, what, 20 when this video was made? There's at least unique perspective here that I don't see in any other of the jazz videos that I saw. Maybe with the exception of Thomas's video, but he was only reacting to a scene. Because how do you watch a psychological drama thriller and then proceed to ignore anything psychological about the movie? Just because you're a professional at jazz does not mean you're fit to dissect film, and a lot of these guys just aren't. And it's not to say they're not supposed to talk about movies ever. I mean, if they never made these videos, I wouldn't have a video myself. Someone like Chuck isn't trying to give you a super in-depth in-depth analysis into the movie, but because of that, the video is just kind of a waste to watch. It's genuinely not worth watching. So I'm still trying to figure out a proper way to put it into words, but by the time this video is uploaded, Adam Neely's Whiplash video will be over 6 years old. If you didn't have this video, you wouldn't have Rick's video. I doubt you'd have a lot of these jazz drummers reacting to this movie if you didn't have this video to start it off with. Expert after expert after expert has reacted to this movie to varying degrees, and you know what? Most of their takeaways are pretty fucking awful. If you watch a movie and you're rating it based on the accuracy to the real world, then you're setting yourself up to be disappointed. That's just how it is. And you know what? I hated this video ever since I was 15, and you know what? 15-year-old me couldn't make a video like this. They just couldn't. Shit, the version of me from a year ago couldn't make a video like this, because the video I made like this a year ago was completely different. Which honestly is probably why I connect to Whiplash so much. Because I make this video not just because I love Whiplash, but because I love movies and art. Despite what Rick might show on a Google trend, I think art is still beloved. And I love entertainment and how it can create these new experiences and emotions that we can share. And if you really want a video talking about how great Whiplash is, there's other video essays out there that talk about the movie as a movie. But as someone who loves both jazz and movies, there is an even more special place in my heart for Whiplash. I think there's a very universal message here, and the setting of jazz very much enhances it. I think more people have walked away from this movie enjoying jazz before they watched it, which isn't that what you want? Are there institutions out there that think this movie's racist? They found a way, because the issue with this movie isn't the accuracy, it's the people who think it's motivational. And those people who think it's motivational are the ones that go up to these jazz musicians and say, oh, is Whiplash anything like... You want to go, hold on, nuh-uh-uh, sit them down, and then you just want to tell them, I am not what this movie represents. It is just a movie. The experience you had in this movie is not my experience, and that's what makes art so great.